This kid jolted awake in a tiny village, and the whole place felt like a warning, snatching the rarest class on the entire planet, the necromancer. But he's still way too young. His powers haven't had enough training time to evolve yet. For now, he's laying back, just living it up like it's any other day, kicking it with his friends and soaking in the normal life. Alec, our main guy, grew up under his grandpa's roof, raised with every hard-earned lesson. Even though he's still just a kid, everyone around him treats him like he's full-grown and in charge. He even slides into the big adult meetings in the village, listening in like he belongs there. Today's meeting was all about one thing, the upcoming festival. And just like that, they started handing the responsibilities out to everyone. Alec got stuck with the job of delivering the congratulatory speech at the festival, so he sprinted straight to the shop to grab the outfit he needed for that huge speech. Right as he was swapping clothes, his friend Mia burst into the store. "Got a minute? Can we talk?" Alec and Mia took a thrilling stroll deep into the forest, but it was so quiet it felt like an invisible wall shoved itself between them. She caught herself thinking it over, then told him straight up she'd only talk to him after his speech. Then she whipped around, grabbed her courage, and headed straight back home. Watching her walk out the door, he finally got it. This girl meant everything to him. And then it hit him hard, because he even started thinking she could be his future wife. Life kept slapping him down, but that dream of becoming an adventurer never died. And he was counting the days, waiting to hit 15 so he could finally roam the world beyond his village. When he finally stumbled in late, his grandpa was already waiting right there at the door. He was basically asking, "Alec, are you worried about something?" Mia had him wrapped around her finger, and they wouldn't stop teasing him like they knew he was hopelessly in love. Alec's cheeks burned with embarrassment as he hurried inside with his grandpa. The very next day, he linked up with his friends to greet the one person he'd been waiting on. Mr. Kane, the traveling bard. Now get this, his music rides in like a storm. A globe-trotting storyteller, sprinting from place to place just to spin you tales of everything he's ever seen. Alec had been grinding through eternity for this moment, convinced Kane was the one key that would finally unlock him as an adventurer. Curiosity sparked, and he pressed for news from the outside world. Kane leaned in and told him, "East Atlantis is finally at peace, no fighting right now. And up north, the Haida Kingdom is quiet as well." Alex shot a question. Who did he think the Cars Empire was gearing up to strike? Turns out Atlantis was the most likely target of them all. The kid clocked it instantly. This whole war hinges on one thing: whether the Pendragon Kingdom steps in or stays out. He knew he had to start training right away, because if war ever crashed into his village, he wanted to be strong enough to survive. Later, right in the middle of the festival, things started to heat up. Alex stepped up and tore into a huge, heart-pounding congratulatory speech. And the whole crowd erupted in loud cheers, hanging on every word he said. Right after that, Mia slid in and quietly beckoned him over. Then they slapped him with praise and told him, straight to his face, that his speech was absolutely stunning. Then out of nowhere, the vibe slammed into something heavy and dark. And she shot him a question. Was he really planning to leave the village? He leans in and declares he's going to tear through the whole world, one trip at a time. Then the world shifts because she snaps him with an unexpected request. Can she tag along with him? He leans in and tells her, "Stay back out there is a nightmare, packed with people who are only waiting to ruin you." Still, no matter what she heard, she clenched her resolve and refused to back out. She was going with him. He shot his hand forward. Alec lets her tag along despite knowing full well what could go wrong. A whole year slipped by, and Alec was locked in, hammering his magic into shape with his grandfather squared his shoulders, ready to step out into the wild world. To become a true dark mage, he had to conquer 4 elements: water, fire, earth, and air. 3 months later, he was back ready to strike. He had already cranked every single one of his magical stats up to a whole new level. While trudging through the forest, he suddenly sensed the path wasn't right. Something felt off, and it made his skin prickle, spotting a bush in the middle of the road that absolutely hadn't been there a second ago. Right when he got closer, he spotted it, 1 foot shoved straight out of the bushes. Suddenly, a woman burst out of the bushes like she'd been waiting to strike. She shot her name like a spark lily and introduced herself as an elf. Alex stepped up, slapped a grin on his face, and told everyone he was from Kettle Village. Turns out Lily actually knows Alex's grandfather, like she's connected to his family for real, and they've got to rush her to see him right away. After 10 brutal years, she finally pulled up to the house and met Gale again, face to face. She burst into the scene out of nowhere, and it left him utterly stunned. Lily couldn't stop bragging she'd actually clawed her way to level 38, and pressed him for what level he was at right now. He shot back that, as a sage, he was camped at level 50, which left her squirming with awkward dread, because he'd already smashed past the level cap. Since she was already there, he leaned in and asked if she could step in and train the village kids for a bit. She hesitated for a split second before finally committing, but before long they finally gave in, and accepted his request. She leaned in and grilled her for Alex's latest stats, and they checked his levels, and holy crap, they were insanely high for someone his age. A few days later, the training day finally crashed into place. Alec, Mia, and Jilly couldn't wait to find out what kind of brutal training was about to hit them. They arrived, and boom, a colossal golem towered in front of them, and every single person's courage instantly evaporated into pure terror. And Lily just blurted out that this monster was their new training partner. With fear flipping into pure adrenaline, they slammed forward and charged straight at the golem. Alec kicks things off by snapping on his mobility boost and surging forward, while Jilly instantly knocks an arrow and fires it off. He lunged to strike the golem and freeze it in place on the spot. Chasing the moment, Alec launches a deadly long-range strike. He slammed the golem apart into a rain of shattered pieces. Lily had no idea they'd be this good, but she warned them that their next opponent was going to be brutal. 3 months later, everyone was packed around Grandpa Gale's dinner table, digging in like it was the best night ever, as they dug into their food and traded excited updates about how their training was going. Someone started slamming the front door like their life depended on it. Still, the village hunter apologized for showing up so late, cutting straight through the moment. But then urgent news hit him hard. A wyvern dragon had been spotted in the northern forest. Lily didn't hesitate for a second. She blurted out that the timing was absolutely perfect. The hunter figured she was coming to help, but then she flipped the script and had a totally different plan. She declared that the only ones who'd bring this beast down would be the 3 kids, Alec, Mia, and Jilly. Alik stormed straight to Mia and Jilly and dropped the news, leaving both of them reeling in pure shock. And right there, he also spilled the news Grandpa had finally agreed to her request. Now that the mission was locked in, they burned through the entire night, forging their plan to take down the wyvern. Next morning finally hit, and the day of their brand new training challenge was here. Lily snapped that the dragon was right there and ordered them to go silent as they crept closer. When they finally reached the spot, right there, it was he'd totally passed out, fast asleep. Gilly wasted no time. He immediately slid himself into the perfect spot at a safe distance. As Alec charged straight at the beast, he didn't slow down for a second. Right when everyone's guard slipped, he seized the moment and launched his very first attack. Rage burst in the enraged dragon as it barreled straight at Alec. But he wasn't playing around. He unleashed his firestorm ability like a raging storm breaking loose. He drove the dragon back, then kicked it into the sky as high as it could possibly fly. The kids knew that move was coming, so Jilly snapped into action and rained arrows down on the dragon. Alec was riding high because everything was finally going his way. Then the dragon hit him with a brutal surprise. Suddenly he snapped his head around Mia's screaming ripped through the background. A second dragon just burst out of nowhere, and it instantly blindsided everyone. Lily lunged in at the last second to save Mia, but the very next moment, the second wyvern slammed into Lily instead. She snaps into action, blasting the dragon away with her power. But then she froze because the dragon's tail was slick with paralyzing poison. Alice and Alex shrieked, begging Mia to unleash an anti-paralysis spell. She was locked in place, teeth clenched, heart pounding. Pure terror had her totally frozen. Mia was so terrified she froze on the spot, unable to move. Alec leaned in and told Jilly he was heading in right then to save Lily. But just like that, Jilly got slammed, leaving Alex standing alone, the very last one standing. Rage and panic surged through him, and he threw everything he had into one last chance to live. He downed the very last potion he had left, gulping it like it was his final lifeline. Cast a spell and pinned that dragon in place for good, and then unleashed a burst of magic that tore open a gigantic sinkhole. A soul surged through it, and the dragon crashed into the earth, dropping deeper than anyone could see. And just when it seemed the whole nightmare was finished, the dragon hauled itself back up to the surface. Even with his strength gone, Alex still spun around and launched an ice-cold beer. But the dragon was so brutal and powerful that it smashed the spell to pieces, and steadily closed the distance, stalking him like it was already over. Alec crumpled on the ground, utterly beaten, like his final breath was already on its way. Right as the dragon lunged to chomp him, it hit him. He wasn't done living yet. So he dug deep inside his soul, grabbed every last ounce of power, and hurled one final spell straight at the beast. With its chest ripped open, the dragon finally keeled over for good. When the paralysis broke, Lily bolted over to him in a blur. And then they saw Alec crumpled on the ground, passed out cold. Against all odds, Alec charged in alone and brought the dragon down. No help, no backup, just pure grit. Heading back to the village, Lily snapped to attention. She knew she had to go all in, pushing the next generation of heroes to their absolute breaking point. Ever since the wyvern, Goran got put down, about a year went by. The moment Alec got an advanced profession, the clock started ticking. Lily had to pack up and chase the chance to enter the competition and seize the title of queen. She promised she'd come back, and deep down she figured the boy wouldn't even be there because he'd be off on his own journey too. They traded tearful farewells and split off in opposite directions. While also leveling up into a sage, Alec didn't just pick a class, he snatched up the alchemist role to train in magic and learn the secrets of pharmacology from his grandfather. Against all odds, the protagonist nailed Gale's approval on his magical mixtures and got the green light for everything. Thanks to all his hard work, he finally got to put his skills to the test and forge brand new medicines. Right in the middle of his studies, Alex suddenly remembered he had a meeting at 6 sharp in the evening. It was all tied to the harvest festival, so he had to sprint to the village leader. Even after hearing all that, the sage's energy was cooked. He just couldn't drag himself out of the house. And then he swallowed his pride, asking his grandson to handle the meeting alone this time. Like always, they called everyone together for an assembly and grilled out the game plan for the year ahead. When he finally made it back home, Alec marched up to his grandfather, flashed a grin, and told him everything was perfectly set. Looks like Kane was about to hit the village again this year. But there were still a few loose ends left to tie up. Like those restless kids preparing to ditch the village and chase their dreams as adventurers in the royal capital. Right as the protagonist said it out loud. Then it hit him, his grandfather had gone dead silent, like he'd stopped responding for good. When he reached the bed, he leaned in to see if the guy was still awake. The very next day, they buried Dial right there beside every villager who'd loved him. Alex sobbed by himself at the grave, tears falling like he was begging the dead to answer. Mia burst over and tackled him into a hug, trying to soothe the hurt before it could sink in. After a bit of bonding, Jilly finally closed the distance and came in to talk. The boy told them his mom was cooking dinner. But he couldn't stop worrying about his friends because he hadn't even eaten a bite. Even though Alex looked utterly drained, he still pushed on. His friends grabbed him and hauled him back home. 7 more years tore by, and now it was down to just 3 months before Alec turned 15. Even then, he still pushed forward with his chemistry experiments like nothing could stop him. He slammed through his final daily quota. Out of nowhere, someone slammed on the door and demanded permission to come in. Mia was the one who showed up to bring the protagonist a snack, and then he slammed into setting the table. Right as the protagonist wrapped up his work, the girl insisted they talk about the trip preparations a bit later. She wrestled with it for ages. But the big question still wouldn't let her decide what they should take. Alec told me he'd build travel gear himself, so all I'd have to pack was a change of clothes. With his alchemy, he could craft a bunch of stuff solo, but the rest, he'd still have to hunt down and buy as they go. It was so good that Mia even started dreaming about learning alchemy herself until the protagonist shut that idea down, warning it would swallow too much time. Alec leaned in and demanded to know whether Anna's training was finally paying off. Mia's little sister, only 7 years old, had somehow mastered how to cure poison the very day before. Even though they looked similar, that younger girl couldn't stand Alec for some reason, like pure hatred just sparked in her chest. A little while after that, Jilly burst onto the scene at the house, now a level 42 hunter. He showed up with a visitor and leaned in, asking if now was the perfect time to talk. The visitor swallowed his pride, apologized fast, and asked quietly but urgently for permission to show up in a time as packed as this. 2 people slipped into Alex's house, leaving him totally baffled. He had no idea who they were. The moment the visitors realized this was the Sage Giles' house, relief flooded her, and she blurted out, "Can we talk for a second?" Alex stared in shock. He rarely, if ever, had visitors at home. So he hurriedly apologized for not being able to offer more hospitality, but the girl waved it off like it didn't matter at all. She couldn't stop wondering where Giles was going to show up. And the protagonist says that his grandfather died years ago. The visitors were totally caught off guard when he slid in and stole the question from him. Alex shot back that no successor had ever been chosen. Then he stepped in and took over as the pharmacist himself. This chaos threw the visitors into panic, and one of them finally blurted out, "So what gear did the former sage use?" The protagonist freezes for a beat, gripping tight with one burning question. What did they want, exactly? Then he spins a lie to the visitors, claiming he burned his staff and robe at the funeral. And that was the moment Nightfall found Chris seething with fury over the sheer audacity of what they'd pulled. The girl snaps at the night itself, then bows her head and apologizes for her attendant's nasty behavior. Yeah, but that was a nightmare, because they'd already lost Giles and his gear, and now everything was in ruins. Right after the girl demanded his name, Alec finally stepped forward and introduced himself. The girl shoots them an apologetic look, explaining they can't give their names right this second. But she still gives the protagonist a shot, letting him work side by side with her. After that offer lands, Alec politely turns it down, then tells them he's already planning to hit the road in just 3 months. It was a total tragedy for the poor girl. She rises to her feet, reaches out, and offers her hand for him to take, like, "Come on, shake it." Even Chris practically froze when that greeting hit him. And Alec mirrored that shock straight back at him. After a heartbeat, they slam their hands together in a deal-making handshake, and the visitors storm out one by one, leaving everything behind. At that exact moment, Joey came barreling over, ready to talk. He tells her that the woman along with her attendant has brought even more knights. 2 of them stand at the village gates, and 1 lingers by the house. Everything's set, and they're primed to move. This twist made Alex stop cold because the way that visitor carried himself screamed royal. By the time you were a level 50 swordsman, you could finally earn the title of knight. And trust me, there weren't many of them in the whole world. The protagonist leans in and tells his friend exactly what those visitors had come for, and then pushes them to go confront Billy, the village leader. Julia agreed they had to lock down security next time, and she promised she'd tell his father too. Even though Alex sensed something had shifted hard in his friends since they were kids, he couldn't bring himself to say it out loud. Maybe William trained him for years, and that's why it all clicked like this. Joey said he was about to bolt right then. The protagonist told him, "I baked a pie the other day," then decided to hand it over to his friend as a gift. That offer hit the air and he spun around on the spot, grinning like he couldn't wait to jump in. And just like that, the moment he realized he was acting like a kid, his face shot bright red with pure embarrassment. And in the end, Alex couldn't help but smile because that kid was still the same guy he'd first met. Meanwhile, a man snapped his attention to the report. Someone said the Golden Princess finally made her move. She marched straight to the retired sage of her country and demanded help. But every sign pointed to one brutal truth: this sage was dead. The news hit him like a truck. He couldn't believe it was actually real. Then he erupted into a loud, unstoppable laugh. He had no clue what the princess was planning to do with the sage. But who knows? They might just seize the moment and strike. So he commanded his men to smash and burn the entire village to the ground. From the sage's legacy to the princess's cunning plan, everything clicks into place. While everyone else was just waking up, Alex seized the early morning and kicked off a full-on harvest for materials. A full week had passed since that surprise visit, and ever since, a weird feeling kept buzzing in his gut like something wild was about to explode. For now, he'll slip back to the village early and chow down at Mia's house. Suddenly, he hears birds shrieking through the sky in a frantic scramble, and his heart drops as he thinks, what the heck just happened? That gut feeling screamed trouble, so the protagonist bolted back to the village. Alex shoved his belongings aside and headed straight for a look around the village. That's when he spotted a crowd of people smashing and prying a door open. Right then, he can't help but wonder what those 3 are trying to pull by barging into his house. The hooded figure's smile spread the moment Alex's gear came into view, and it hit him. This had to be a gift straight from the sage. The knights didn't even answer his questions. They charged in and attacked the protagonist on the spot. At that exact moment, he snapped his fingers and unleashed raw magic, and he slammed into the men's legs, making them tumble down. The hooded mage instantly clocked it. This kid had to be the sage's disciple because no one else could juggle that many elements at such a young age. So when the time came, he didn't just strike, he showed zero mercy. And he was yanked to Griffin's side for a no-holds-barred fight. When Alec laid eyes on that monster, he knew the summoner was going to wreck his plans. He blasted a roaring wall of fire and slammed his way through, forcing the Griffin's claws to miss him. In theory, that summoned monster would charge into the front lines while its summoner stayed back, keeping it alive and calling the shots. So yeah, it was basically a one-man showdown just with 2 opponents closing in. 2 mind-bending spells that were exactly the same, but his opponent was clearly the stronger one, and it showed. Alec refused to budge, and the mage cackled, then unleashed a whole new way to attack. He loosed a terrifying cloud of poison into the air, and yanking Alec out of harm's way with a sudden brutal jolt. At the same moment, the Griffin launched upward, aiming its strike right at his head, forcing Alec to twist out of the way. He snapped out a fresh lightning spell. With that, the summoning got completely crushed, and the protagonist finally got the shot to heal and turn the tide. Alec was outnumbered and overpowered, but there might still be a sliver of hope to flip the whole fight. His opponent dismissed him as nothing more than some bargain bin dark mage, but Alec could whip out white magic and even sage magic too. While he waited, he purged the poison and supercharged his willpower. The summoner let out a wicked laugh. Sure, his opponent had pushed this far, but the real stakes were still roaring in the air. He hurled a blazing fire spell, and Alex snapped up a magical barrier and fought back, blocking every attack. Then he slammed healing magic into the wound and brought everyone back from the brink, and doubled his magical power in one explosive surge. Then his legs gave out, and he crashed to his knees. It was a slick move. He baited his opponent into dropping their guard and silencing any bragging. At last, the mage snapped a command, and his griffin swooped in to end him for good. And that was the perfect opening. The protagonist had to strike right then. He raised his staff and unleashed a blinding spell that lit up the whole place. He dodged the other mage's strikes and slipped out of harm's way. The summoner snapped to a stop, completely frozen like the world just shut off around him. Alex somehow shrugged off every single one of his attacks, and that alone was the real shock, until that ice magic blast finally pinned him under pressure. He fired off shots and sent them crashing to the ground. The mage still couldn't wrap his head around the fact that he'd actually stood toe-to-toe with a sage, and then he erupted into laughter, because this result blew right past anything he expected. Once the fight finally ended, Alex snapped, "So what are we even doing? Why did you invade my home in the first place?" The man finally spilled the truth. He was doing it to chase his inheritance through the dials. The sage's stone, the relic everyone wants, but only a genius like you dares to chase. It was one of those sacred relics sages relied on to unlock brand new skills. It was a special key item that kicks off quests, so the player could master brand new techniques. Alec had his grandfather's things, but one odd item didn't ring a single bell in his memory like it had appeared out of nowhere. If anyone holds the sage's stone, they'll crack open the world's hidden truth and finally see everything for what it really is. The protagonist stared in shock because the mage in front of him wasn't a mage at all. He was just a summoner. So, no having the stone in his hands still wouldn't help him use it. Or maybe he never even caught this detail because someone else was already hunting for the stone. Right then, the summoner snapped that Alec needed to be somewhere else. Stop wasting time here. Maybe he could race over and find out how the village was holding up now, just when he thought he was finally safe. Smoke curled up from deep in the tree. Alec couldn't believe it. Why would they swing from nothing and suddenly hit the village like that? And the mage blurted out that the sage's stone wasn't the main target. It was just a side objective. They set out to smash the princess's plans and rip out the seed she'd already planted. They couldn't let a single soul find out what they were doing. It was their job to stomp every single seed she'd planted, without mercy. Those words detonated inside him because they dragged innocent people into it all. Suddenly, the summoner snatched out a scroll and it burst into a furious glow. He was ready to bolt right now, but deep down he promised himself he'd come back someday and rip revenge out of this battle. Before Alec could even blink, the mage vanished in a flash teleportation scroll and all. That made him furious. His shot at more answers slipped right out of reach. All this talk was just a trap to stall him and give the griffin the opening to slip free. Then the monster slaughtered its own knights too, cutting them down to keep every last one of them silent. With that chaos behind him, Alex sprinted through the streets toward the village, heart pounding as he ran for his life. He couldn't stop worrying about Mia because he feared what trouble she might be stepping into. When the protagonist finally arrived, he was hit head-on with a brutal, horrifying wreckage that made his stomach drop. He slammed one of the night sentries to the ground. He bolted through the night, chasing after his two friends. The entire neighborhood erupted in flames, every house burning at once. Flames roared as bodies piled up on the ground, corpse after corpse. Right in the middle of all the chaos, when everything was falling apart, he finally tracked Jilly down. Still fresh off his hunt, he couldn't even settle down. Confusion hit him right in the middle of it. Alec pressed healing into his friend, then they tore off running right toward the chance to meet Mia. They team up and smash through the knights and mages, stopping anything that gets in their way, until they finally stumbled upon the chief's house, wrecked into nothing but ruins. And as they fell, arrows drove straight into their backs. Tom and Billy were the targets, and Alec vowed he'd never let those invaders get away with their wicked cruelty. They kept sprinting, tearing through the wreckage to find more survivors until they stumbled on the destroyed fields. And all those childhood spots where he and his friends would hang out and make memories together. Then Jilly screamed, snapping everyone to attention. Mia's house was on fire. Arrows slammed into her, and then she got pinned hard against the door herself. The two rush in and slam into the knights, knocking their weapons clean out of their hands. While Jilly fought the opponents head-on, the protagonist bolted over to check if his friend was still okay. The moment she saw Alec rushing in to help, relief flooded her face and a bright smile broke out. And just as everything was about to tip, a fresh arrow slammed straight into her chest. Then Mia's body crashed to the ground and Alec went totally still, stricken by shock. He sprinted after her, desperate to save her in time. Jilly couldn't stop staring, wondering where that brutal attack had even come from. The protagonist yanks the arrow free from where it's been hidden. The arrow lands and he rushes in, aiming to heal her fast and slam the brakes on the bleeding. No matter how hard he blasts his powers, her wounds won't seal. Nothing can make them close. Her lungs stayed untouched, no matter how bad it looked. That kind of injury should have been a quick fix. Healing magic could mend wounds only up to a certain point, but once the damage crossed that line, the power just stopped working. So yeah, it was completely utterly impossible. You can't heal someone who's already dead. Alec was a true sage, and that meant his magic should have been able to bring people back from the dead. To pull off something like that, you had to be at level 35. That level's way too high to even touch right now. This protagonist had barely scraped past level 10 just recently. and it snapped him back to his grandfather's words. Ever since Billy was a kid, he dreamed his grandson would grow up to be a true sage. Because the boy wanted to become a necromancer, a sage could still stall his big mission and buy him time. And in that moment, he actually believed it. Then that belief came back to bite Alec of the future, hard, after what felt like an eternity. He snaps back to it right in the middle of the chaos. The fight is still raging. Jilly spun around, totally stunned, trying to figure out what just happened to his friend and what had happened to Mia. He watched Alec close in and slam spell after spell in rapid succession. Above all, he was swinging an enchanted weapon, and that blew the hunter's mind. Without a shred of doubt, the mage launches into the fight and starts striking every opponent right away. But he didn't cast a single magical spell. He crushed everything with raw, brute force. Jilly stared at those brutal attacks in shock, trying to soothe his furious friend, but he couldn't even step into the chaos. At this pace, the mage is going to burn through every last drop of mana and then collapse from pure exhaustion. But even then, Alec couldn't stop losing Mia, forever burned in his chest, and it drove him to keep mowing down anyone who got in his way. The knights were totally baffled, so they blurted out for their commander, begging him to explain what was going on. After a bit, the knights' commander finally showed up to see what was making his men drop like flies. He broke into laughter the moment he realized all of this chaos traced back to one simple, bratty kid. Right away, Alec clocked it. His commander wasn't just some soldier. He was a sword-wielding mage, backed by magical gear. Of course, his spell shots still didn't land. They fizzled out the moment they hit. So instead of backing down, the protagonist cranked his magic up even higher, and he hurled a death spell into the world. The moment the captain hit the ground, all his subordinates stared in total confusion, and panic swallowed them whole because the sage standing right there looked like an absolute monster. No matter how hard they pleaded, Alec shut the door on mercy and refused to give them even a sliver. He wanted to wipe out as many men as he could. Every last one of them who wiped out his village needed to be crushed by his own hands. When the fight finally stopped, a crushing silence swallowed everything. It was cruelly ironic Alec couldn't use Majid to revive anyone. Yet he still managed to set off even more deaths. Finally, he stormed up to Mia's body, and before long, Gilly was closing in too. He tore through the village, scanning every corner, but there wasn't a single survivor left. And that's when his mind started racing. So what on earth were they supposed to do next? The sun was about to dip, and they had to scramble for food fast, then find somewhere to crash before night swallowed them. Those words only lit Alec up with rage because his friend stayed way too calm, even with everything going on. He jerked a hand in his direction and told him to look at what the village had become. Nothing else was left for the two of them. Even after everything, the hunter still had the nerve to be cruel like none of it ever happened. In the end, Mia was the only thing that truly mattered to him. Even with the accusations flying, Joe stayed cool and snapped back that Alec wasn't the only one paying the price. When he got left on his own, losing his parents and friends felt like it crushed him, and he'd react the exact same way. But this time, it was the protagonist who froze in pure horror. Seeing Jilly like that lit a fire in her, and she rushed in to stand by him with everything she had. Finally, Alex sucked in a deep breath, like he was about to jump into a storm. He gasped for air and dropped to his knee, crying nonstop, unable to stop the tears from pouring. After that, he couldn't even tell how much time had slipped by. Then his friend dashed out to hunt for food. But Alec only managed to curl up tighter, smothered in depression. For some reason, his body flat out refused to listen to him, even after he trained like his life depended on it. When the moment hit, he still couldn't save a single soul. Death felt like a cold void, loneliness, misery, and emptiness all at once, and after dying once before, Alec knew that crushing feeling all too well. After everything, he still let Mia down when she needed him most. While he wrestled with himself, suddenly something brushed him like a hand reaching out of the dark. But when he whipped his head around, he was completely alone, no one anywhere. Then that wild sensation ripped through Alec once more. It felt like something was drifting in the air right above me. They say when someone turns into a necromancer, they unlock terrifying, one-of-a-kind powers, and what they can do depends on the soul behind it. The power waiting in the protagonist's hands was called talking to the dead. If he could level up and swap professions, he'd finally master the craft. But there was one more move Alec could still pull off. Did it, even if it seemed small. That's why he follows that kind of spirit straight into the house and rockets up the stairs. At last, he was steered straight to Mia's room. He shot out of the room and barreled straight for the wardrobe. When Jilly came back with the food, he couldn't find his friend anywhere outside. As soon as he stepped into the house, then before long, he finally ran into Alec. The boy scrambled upward, blurting, "Why did the mage climb up there?" Then he got swept up and bam, someone guided him straight to Mia's room. When they yanked the wardrobe doors open, they stumbled onto a moment so wild it didn't even feel real. It looked like she was just catching a nap, and honestly, I felt my whole chest loosen with relief. Turns out they weren't alone. They tracked down another survivor, and it was Mia's little sister, Anna. Mia must have risked everything because she jumped in to save her life. So she stayed out there alone, staring down the nights, like it was her fight to win. She was a powerhouse, brave to the bone, nothing like Alec. The very next day, Gilly came back like nothing happened after slipping out for just a minute. The hunter pushed to check the village, and sure enough, with nobody in sight, he knew the rescue wouldn't reach them anytime soon. And somehow he tracked down the gear and clothes Anna needed. Alex shot him a quick thank you and told the boy to run, wake the girl up. The girl got hit with a warm smile, and breakfast was served before she could even react. But she didn't look even a little happy. She demanded to know how the heck she ever wound up in Alex's house. And she finally figured out where her older sister had vanished to. That made the protagonist pause hard, holding back his words until he'd finished eating and could finally explain everything. Then he leaned in and told her straight up that the village had been hit the day before by unknown mysterious attackers. Anna nodded, admitting she only knew to trust, because Mia had begged her to crawl into the wardrobe and stay hidden. At last, the mage dropped the truth. Only the three of them made it out alive. But somehow everyone else was gone, wiped out. Even their parents, the village chief and her sister, got wiped out. The girl let out a scream of pure disbelief, like the world just broke in her hands, and she couldn't process it. And yeah, she'd always heard the same rumor. Alec was insanely strong, the type to swoop in and save them the second things got dangerous. And sure enough, Anna pressed him with the question why he still hadn't done it. All the protagonist could manage was the brutal truth he was just too weak. If he'd been just a little stronger, Mia and everyone else might still be breathing right now. He even started throwing blame at Mia and Anna too. So they figured if they'd been tougher, everything would have turned out completely different. Jilly snapped at him for what he'd done, and the girl's hand shook with fury when she realized just how awful that so-called weakness really was. Even as her hunter friend tried to shut down that creepy conversation, Alec cut him off right in the middle of it. Because in this world, strength didn't just help it crush the weak. Anna cut in and said, "Fine then, we'll get strong from right here on out." She refused to let anyone outshine her again, and demanded their help to forge this path. Power, authority, wealth, none of that was handed to him like a privilege. Not even close, it was beyond the weak's reach. Honestly, that was exactly what they didn't have. Everything they needed just wasn't there. So they wouldn't lose anyone else they loved. They had to toughen up and get stronger right now. The protagonist nodded to the little girl's plea, then swore, "We'll get stronger together." After that, they tear through their final meal in the village, and then it's done. Then they snatched up their stuff and pulled it all together. With the exact gear they needed, they ripped themselves away from their hometown and headed for a place they couldn't even name. The three-headed crew charged north into the forest, and right there, Alex started training Anna to wield her magic like a pro. The mage let a slime cling to the girl's body, then gave her the freedom to strike anytime she wanted. Even nervous, she launched fire arrows. He keeps pushing forward, then finally, bam, he lands the hit and scores the slime. Then the monster lunged at her, straight up attacking on the spot. And right when things were about to spiral, Alex snapped in and cut it off. The boy explained that the whole thing worked because of the gear his grandfather had left behind back when he was still out there adventuring. And right on her first day, he lavished her with praise for smashing magic like she'd done it 100 times. Since then, Anna had been soaking up dark magic with the protagonist right beside her, pushing her deeper every step of the way. Instead of chasing white magic that heals and fixes, she set her sights on getting stronger, so she went all in on dark magic. That training pace yanked Alex straight back to the days he was grinding under the old sage's watch. For now, they pushed through the day's training carefully, so the new girl wouldn't get wiped out because she'd already left the village, and Alec, the master, was watching. Even though her cold distance hurt him, the protagonist swallowed his pain and stood by her decision. Late at night, Gilly leaned in and fired off the question to Alec, where were they headed this time? They're headed for Harbor, the merchant city, sitting south of the village, and they'll roll in 2 weeks from now. The hunter's eyes went wide because he'd sworn they were marching straight for the royal capital, and the answer hit him like a shock. But the mage tried to dodge the royal family at every turn, keeping his distance whenever he could. But that was a secret he'd clamped shut in his own chest. Then Alec pushed the idea harder. It'd be smarter to head somewhere with a port so they could travel. The second they rolled into the city, they headed straight for the guild to grab cards for all three of them. Then Anna blinked at the conversation, totally lost, as they broke down what it was really for. Their names and countries were stamped right onto a registration card, and that single card let them cross the whole nation. That would make it way easier for them to jet off to other countries. Since the village was wiped off the map, they had no clue where their birthplace even was, so that card was priceless for tracking down their personal belongings. And damn, it felt amazing when they finally formed a clan after all that. Most of the time, the guild let people send in their requests. So Jilly's totally stumped. Why does Alec want guild too? The protagonist quickly breaks it down with a clan, they'd get a special residence, and they'd finally be able to take on the nasty high-stakes quests. And when they said Anna couldn't handle high-level quests, 3 more people had to scramble in to form a clan. The girl swore she'd get stronger so she could stand shoulder to shoulder with them in the fight. Alex saw no danger at all, because he never meant to push her past her limits. Just when it looked like everything was perfectly set, Jilly finally caved and agreed to his proposal. 3 more days slammed by, and Anna kept training with zero mercy. This time, she swung at the goblin, then completely whiffed, like she couldn't believe it herself. She shrieked in pure panic the moment they zeroed in on her. And the other 2 just stood back at a distance, watching while she took the hardest part of their intense training on her own. 2 more days blew by, and her progress started shouting louder and louder. Before long, she was chopping through monsters all by herself. Even with magic in her back pocket, Anna still fumbled every other task like her hands had a mind of their own. At the end of it all, the girl could only swallow her pride and apologize for how badly she messed everything up. Alec didn't hold her failures against her. His heart stayed calm, not furious. After all, it was her very first time dealing with all that stuff. Right then, Anna leaned in and asked the protagonist, while he was with Mia, if he could actually fish. And that's when he realized back then, they'd sworn to chase adventure side by side. Not only fishing, they stalked through the forest. Hunting and gathering supplies nonstop for a full week. Back when Lily was still with them, that trio of friends and Anna were the exact same age. Right in the middle of their chat, Jilly blurted, "The food's ready." Alex was ready, so he grabbed this moment and shot Alex a question. He couldn't stop wondering once he hit level 50 as a hunter, what jobs were even on the table. That's why after he slaughtered wave after wave of villagers, his powers shot up fast and hard. The protagonist got blindsided because it turned out you could rack up experience by taking human lives. Shaking off the shock, he dove into every detail of what he knew and laid it all out. Jilly's got the fire to become a sniper, and she'll master those brutal long-range shots. Or he could choose to become a ranger trained to dominate forest terrain combat. And on top of that, if he hit level 30 as a blacksmith, he'd unlock the chance to specialize in traps. If he upgraded as a thief, he'd turn into a treasure hunter, snatching rare items and dragging them home. That said, he leaned in and asked his friend, "So what kind of skill are you really after?" A sniper might pack insane firepower, but when defenses kick in, it crumbles while the ranger can crush both group battles and solo fights. Step outside the forest, and it suddenly feels useless. With all those paths in front of her, Gilly chose to lock in as a sniper. But if it was really about surviving, then becoming a hunter was more than enough. He wanted to get strong enough to stand shoulder to shoulder with Alec, and a sniper felt like the perfect weapon for that goal. Finally, Anna thanked everyone for the meal and headed off to bed. And the other 2 followed her lead, too, still a little confused. But they went along anyway. Just a week after she fled the village, she figured out how to forge deadly barriers and tear-proof protection. She leaned in and grilled her master, demanding to know what kind of monster they'd be forced to face next. The protagonist confessed that he'd begged Jilly to look after a massive orc one that terrified her. She told us orcs can just keep going forever, but they move like they're dragging weights, so it all comes down to how smart and careful she plays it. The hunter didn't waste a second. He came sprinting in, and the monster came barreling right behind him. Then Alec grabbed his student by the lead and shoved him straight into the fight. He surged forward and forced her to fire a blazing arrow. Even with a flicker of fear, Anna gripped tight, restrained the orc, and unleashed even more attacks. She barely had time to clock it before it hit her. He was about to bust free any moment. Before that could even happen, the girl unleashed a blazing fire vortex. From Alex's perspective, it wasn't terrible, but it still wasn't right. A fiery vortex snapped shut around the target, trapping them in a glowing sphere of flames for 10 brutal seconds, and the damage hit just a bit harder than the fire arrows. Still, keeping that mana steady demanded 5 times the usual cost. And just like that, the orc tore free moments later, right after her spell fizzled out, and charged at the girl next, as Anna couldn't protect herself. Alex stepped in and blasted a lightning spell to stop it cold. Then, with one lightning-fast move, he ended it for good. He darted away, and the girl just stood there, stunned. Then the protagonist snapped a warning to her careless steps near that fire vortex would get her burned. Right then, they were locked in a brutal fight, scrambling, clawing, and training their way toward one goal, getting stronger. But just because they made it this far doesn't mean they'll survive tomorrow. Never, ever underestimate your opponents. And yeah, Anna better always keep a stash of mana in reserve. Her blunder makes her rush to apologize, but Alec doesn't snap. He's not angry at all. The boy could tell she'd given it everything. So he didn't stress a bit. He just took her effort and turned it into fuel to get even better. A nightmare hit her hard, and she started thrashing and turning in her sleep like she couldn't breathe. She still remembers the moment Mia told her little sister to tuck herself safely in the closet. No matter how wildly the girl shouted for Mia, it didn't bring her back. Maria was left standing there completely alone. With all that anxiety crashing down, Alec rushed in to make sure Anna was really okay. He figured the training drained her completely, so he rushed out to warm up some milk for her. Anna chased after him. He catches his eye, then spots it. Alec's got a whole stash of items tucked into his belongings. The protagonist finally spilled the truth. These weren't ordinary items at all, and promised that once they hit the city, he'd keep every last one sealed tight. He stitched it all together with pure skill, every last tent and lantern included, all made by his own hands. The girl nearly choked on her own shock when she realized her master could pull off one incredible feat after another. But instead, weakness swallowed her whole. She couldn't speak, couldn't act, and felt utterly useless. Even when Alec fought tooth and nail to deny those words, the girl blared that Mia was way better, like no question about it. If it were her sister, she'd have cooked like a pro and fished without messing up, so nobody would have even been bothered. She pleaded with them to not leave her behind, no matter how awful she thought she'd become. Alec shot back instantly. No way, I'd never do that. Because Anna was his sister and everything but blood now. Even so, the girl didn't buy a word. She backed up fast, like his truth was dangerous. She clutched onto hope, sure that they'd toss her aside sooner or later. Finally, Alec grabbed her by the shoulders and forced her to meet his eyes. Mia wasn't there, so everything felt way too quiet. He'd never leave her behind. He'd stay right by her side, no matter what. He clung to that promise and pulled her into a tight hug, pouring comfort into her shaken heart. Alec felt like a total idiot after realizing he never once noticed just how anxious that girl had been. From her side of the story, Alec and Jilly were nothing more than her sister's friends. No family, no allies, not even people she'd call her own companions. She pushed herself every single day because the alternative was getting tossed aside, discarded like she didn't matter. Then Anna snapped back into training, and the trio's journey roared on. Just 14 days after she left the village, she was strong enough to wipe out 3 orcs by herself. The protagonist demanded she hand over everything she'd grabbed from those monsters to Jilly. Even though he didn't get it, the way she kept calling Alec brother screamed there was favoritism hiding right under the surface. Then, boom, she hit level 15 as a black mage, and her power started skyrocketing like crazy, all because they hadn't faced battles so brutal in ages. It might have been that she finally carved out room to level up without the noise of everything else pulling at her. At this rate, Anna's going to grow up and blow everyone away like a breathtaking genius mage. That night, the girl knocked out first, while the other 2 stayed wired and wide awake. Alex told his friend to finally rest too, because this time, he'd keep the watch and handle the force himself. Tomorrow, they'll finally roll into the city because the trip is almost over, and right after that, their real adventure starts. Tucked inside his bag were the relics his grandfather left behind, stuff worth nearly $6 million. That kind of money would take a whole year for most people to earn, but for someone stuck in a tiny village, it was a mountain of cash. To snag top-tier gear, 5 to 6 million yen would disappear fast. They had to hunt down more recruits for the clan, and they didn't get the luxury to wait. They had to march straight into the front lines as warriors. Their living costs were going to hit hard too, so maybe they should toughen themselves up first before chasing any gear. Alec was desperate to help his friend become a sniper, and he wanted it fast. And he had to sit down with Anna and grill her about what profession she wanted to chase in the future. Even now, the protagonist still craves necromancy, but he can't reach that future unless he gets the one rare item that unlocks the profession. Right then, something in the corner of his eye started yanking his focus away. Ever since that brutal village fight, Alec felt a terrifying presence dogging him at every step. Maybe it was his dead whispering power messing with things, but even then, he couldn't see or touch that ghostly presence at all. Ever since he was a kid, he could feel stuff in his bones, and as the years racked up, that power only kept getting louder. Who knows, maybe his level shot up since then. Or maybe it hit him harder than usual because he'd racked up more deaths than anyone could count. No matter what, he had to hunt down the group that wrecked the village because there was no way he could juggle all these disasters at the same time. The very next day, the crew rolled into the city. They got the green light and rushed inside. Anna and Joey were totally spellbound, staring in awe at that vivid, breathtaking place. Meanwhile, Alec was getting crushed by the brutal price of the entry fee, and they had to scramble to earn money fast. So he pushed them to ditch the detours and head straight for the guild. Meanwhile, Anna and Jilly got yanked off track in the blink of an eye, and completely blew him off. In the end, the protagonist fell in step with the two, and tagged along as they gave him a full tour of the city. Volks's port city was the biggest jewel in the Pendragon Kingdom, packed with traders and fueling non-stop commerce. Near the port, tiny islands dotted the water, and tucked among them were dungeons waiting in the shadows. Down south, the Volks pressed right up against the Kaz Empire, sharing a border like it was a loaded trigger. Blood has been spilled in countless wars before, again and again, between these two bitter groups. And just like that, Lox was a fortress city too, ringed by towering walls that made it feel untouchable. They were hanging out by the northern gate, while the guild sat in the southeast, and the only real long haul was the main street. He spotted his companions practically buzzing with excitement for the city. Alex lit up and suggested they go check out the ocean. He said it was east of the city, and right there in sight boats stacked across the water. Jilly was stunned by how insanely clued in his friend was, like he'd been there himself. Nervous as hell, the protagonist admitted he'd only heard rumors about Hans. This was his first time stepping into the city. Relief hit him the second the excuse landed, because in the game, Volks was the player's base, and he'd accidentally spilled more than he should have. Still, it didn't come close to what he already knew. The stalls were bare bones, and the few decent items there got snapped up before anyone could grab them. Ignoring the weirdness, the three of them sprinted straight for the port, but Anna stuffed herself until she couldn't breathe. She was completely full. Meanwhile, the hunter pushed on until Alex's warning cut him off mid-mission. They finally crashed through the finish line and land right at the Mage Guild. They still had to hit the Hunters Guild and the clan office too, so they had to move fast and get everything done right away. They burst into the play, and the attendant at the counter greeted them with a sharp, quick smile. The protagonist leaned in and told her, "Let me register with you right here, side by side." Even though Anna was still young, she could wield both black and white magic. No one cared about age at all. The attendant nodded along, fully buying every word he said. She couldn't shake her worry for the girl. Judging by her face, Alex told her it'd all make sense the moment they finally pulled out the guild card. Then the woman thrust the card forward. There was a magic circle on it, and if you pressed it with bare hands, boom, you'd be officially registered as the owner. Yeah, it might have been a small stash, but every single card was packed with mithril. So each one hit 500, no questions asked. And since it was their very first registration, it was free unless they went and registered again. And just like that, the two majors pulled out their cards and pressed his fingers into the magic circles. The protagonist realized the profession showed up, but the real skills never did. The attendant told them that once they finished registering, they'd be able to dart back to the guild and turn in their requests. Alec bolted over to see if his card was finally ready. Then he spotted something that completely caught him off guard. That's why it kept flashing his name right up until he was reborn in this world. Even so, it still looked like Anna just couldn't wrap her head around that scary detail. So yeah, hand it to the attendant, no problem, and he wasted zero time doing exactly that. Then she abruptly froze because the boy standing there was a level 15 black mage, and he was far stronger than she was. The girl blurted out a little too loudly, then quickly bowed her head and apologized. Alec leaned over to the attendant and demanded they also check Anna's card, and he asked her to stay quiet if she could. After that, the woman hurried to the back to check the card. Back and unleashed a scream the exact same way. Jilly started to worry, but Alex let out a heavy sigh because this was even more out of control than anyone expected. Who burst in a bit later? It was the Guild Master, Watson. The man lunged toward the protagonist and seized his shoulders, completely rattled and breathless. He couldn't rest until he figured out who had taught him to reach that level. The second he heard this guy was a disciple of Gale, the poor man nearly crumpled and dropped straight to the floor. He'd heard the sage took in a child, but no one had ever told him the truth about who would step up next. But then Alec's world flipped again when he realized Watson wasn't just related. He was his grandfather's older brother. It was the first time he'd ever heard a single thing about his family. Then the guildmaster decided, hold up, and pushed for a little more time to talk with the protagonist. Alex shot out an apology the second they arrived because they still had more stops to hit. When he heard that, Watson shot back that he'd write a recommendation letter to get a place for the night. He even spotted the kid rocking his older brother's gear, like it had been handed down on purpose, and that made it crystal clear Giel had passed his prized stuff to his grandson, and there was no doubt left about who he really was. That man's kindness hit Alec hard, and Alec immediately thanked him for everything. As he worked on that recommendation letter, Watson let out a heavy sigh, wishing his troublesome little brother would finally disappear. Honestly, if he'd just stayed in contact all that time, everything would have turned out so much better. Even Gilly eventually got a recommendation from the guildmaster himself, straight to the Hunters Guild. And right nearby, Watson got straight to work prepping rooms for all three of them. The moment they stepped out the door, Alec turned to his great-uncle and thanked him for everything he'd done for them. But the old man still insisted on talking to him later about everything under the sun. The moment the group stepped back, they all leaned in and agreed on one thing. Our guildmaster was a genuinely good man. He was ridiculously friendly, like nothing ever happened, like he still had no clue that Giles had been dead for 7 years. Alec can't stop wondering, does anyone in this village even know that his grandfather's brother ever existed? Right after, the trio took off straight for the Hunters Guild. Turns out those processes were identical, and once they handed over the recommendation letters, everything sped up even more. Jilly got his own guild card with zero drama, and it went smoothly from start to finish. They finally burst into the clan office, ready to register their house for real. The attendant snapped, "Show me your guild cards," and demanded everyone hand them over fast. She leaned in and demanded to know if Alec was truly an alchemist, or if he was just bluffing about all that wisdom. The protagonist clocked it instantly. She wasn't shocked at all, unlike everyone else who had reacted before. He figured he was in the clear until the attendant spotted him and blurted out that he was Giles's disciple. That woman looked like she'd known Owit's grandfather forever, like she was someone he should have recognized. That's because Guile wasn't just some guy. He led the legendary White Ulu clan. That top-tier clan, along with their Volks, steamrolled through some brutal missions and pulled them all off. Back then, countless people banded into clans just to idolize this one man. Not a single citizen in this city doesn't worship him. Heck, even the attendant is a die-hard fan. She couldn't believe it. The hero's disciple was building a whole clan, and it felt like she was watching a brand new legend unfold. Even if Alec refused to act like it meant anything. The woman said it, and honestly, it was exactly the kind of thing a hero would spit out without even thinking. Their ID cards checked out perfectly, no problems whatsoever. You couldn't just toss a few people together and call it a clan. There were extra rules you had to meet besides having at least 3 members. That's because only a crew recognized by the lord of the city could get the full support they wanted. First, we needed at least 3 members over level 15, and honestly, that was a huge relief, because Anna had trained hard enough to truly earn the role. Next, they demanded the entry fee 1 million, straight up cash, and just like that, they kicked off life as a bronze-ranked clan. Julie's curiosity sparked the moment she wondered what that clan house would be like, and whether they could really take it. The attendant leaned in and dropped the bombshell. Houses were reserved for silver rank, and anyone below didn't stand a chance. Those ranks scream your power, how much you fuel the city's might, climbing from bronze to silver, then gold, mithril, and finally orichalcum. The whole group started to feel crushed, knowing they'd still have to wait because that stable house wasn't coming anytime soon. Even though it was a grind to escape the curve, these 3 conditions were the rules that would push their rank higher. First up, the clan leader had to prove he had an advanced profession. Next up, they had to cough up 1 million points and slam it into Dilden's cash transfer. Alec made up his mind. He pressed forward right then, paving the way to get promoted to silver rank. When the attendant froze in shock, the protagonist couldn't shake the fear that he'd totally misread everything. But she couldn't believe a word of it. Utter disbelief hit her like a punch. Because this brand new legendary descendant was ripping legends apart, plundering stories, then vaulting up the ranks like it was nothing. Most of the time, those adventures stayed dead broke, and pulling in 1 million was insanely hard. Alec's nerves went through the roof because he was about to make do with whatever he had on hand. But the rest of the crew shut him down and refused to back his argument. Honestly, if things were different, they'd use that money to upgrade their gear. But in the end, the protagonist didn't look like some ordinary person at all. The attendant practically glowed with pride because the new hero made that choice on the spot, no hesitation at all. And she even apologized for barging into the discussion, then leaned in and asked if the other 2 were in the same group. And if that really was true, she couldn't help but wonder what would their brand new clan be called. Alec knew that if he used the names he'd worn back then, his friends would slam the door in his face. So the attendant blurted out the line of clans: the Golden Sword, the Silver Pterosaur, then the Crimson Battle Axe, and finally the Green Whirlwind. And these 4 clans, they were the absolute top of the food chain in the whole city. In the smaller classes, a few groups smashed together colors and special traits to make their own unique mix. Alex stared at the color white like it was sacred, something he didn't just inherit, but got passed down by his grandfather. He figured the other guilds probably borrowed family names or even copied reference images for the trait. He shot a look at his 2 companions, clans he couldn't stop wondering what made each one so different from the rest. Finally, the protagonist snapped to a decision. So they slammed the decision down and crowned their guild the White Wisdom. Wisdom and knowledge would be tied together from the very start. Knowing everything gave them the edge, and it's what likely separated them from everyone else. The memories from his past life weren't just facts. They were the blueprint to forge a brutal, unstoppable clan, one that refuses to bow to anyone and carves out a shining future. This clan's name would ring in the minds of the civilians of Volks for the rest of time. These rising heroes who carved their way through demon attacks and saved the cities. Yeah, everyone's watching them now, or at least that's what was buzzing in her head. She was already spinning the biggest fanfic of her life. That night, the protagonist got slammed by a nightmare that ripped open the memories of the village attack. The moment he woke up in the morning, the entire group was ushered into the new house. This was where they'd live from now on. The place didn't just look big, it screamed mansion, and everyone knew it was officially the home of the White Wisdom clan. Jillian and Anna stared around, stunned by how huge the place was and already panicking that she'd get lost in it. Even Alex started stammering from pure nerves because he'd heard houses there were packed way tighter than expected. Because he was the great sage's grandson, they handed him the gift, straight up pure favoritism and nepotism, no question. Then the attendant ushers everyone in, and right there, a maid is waiting to greet them. Mary steps in and introduces herself, and even Alec can't believe what he's hearing, especially since Mary was Melissa's sister. Nepotism practically screamed from every step they took. Mary steamrolls past the protagonist's complaints and drags them inside to show off the house. That's when Alec clocks it. These sisters carry the same heavy-handed vibe, like they're always forcing their way in. The maid led them through the living room, dining room, and kitchen, then showed off the reception room and the servants' room too, plus a huge bathroom they could all use. The second floor was packed with bedrooms, and yep, there were exactly 10 of them. Down in the basement, there's a storage room too, plus way more secrets waiting to be uncovered. Alec thanks everyone for the gorgeous house, but he can't shake the feeling it's way too grand for a simple silver clan. Melissa says the administration will take care of the whole construction, and they only have to cough up half the price. Meanwhile, the other silver clans were stuck with just 3 bedrooms in their houses. Hearing that, the protagonist nodded and agreed to take the gift. Everyone was stunned. He just suddenly decided to agree, like it came out of nowhere. Because 3 bedrooms in a regular house just wouldn't cut it. Alec had already told them, "We need to recruit more members," and those extra rooms were the perfect place to make it happen. And Melissa jumps in, saying they're always getting fresh applicant lists, so right now, just soak up the house while you still can. Inside, the attendant was dead sure Alec wouldn't think twice before signing for that house. She knew it'd be worth every word laying it all out to her boss to snag a bigger sponsorship. Soon, the hero would finally clock Melissa's talent, and once he did, he'd recognize her as well. It won't be long before the day finally hits, when the hero keeps Melissa glued to his side, but Alec's watching the whole time. And even if Melissa's fanficking, at least he admits she's doing her job well. Later on, the protagonist ripped back to the Mage Guild, and someone hauled him straight to Watson. The day before they couldn't meet, he got blindsided by the news straight from the clan administration. Everyone was stunned because this was the first time anything like that had ever happened in Volks. Watson jumps in again, reintroduces himself, and tells the protagonist he's basically his great uncle. Still, Guile wasn't his blood at all. 2 orphans somehow ended up being adopted by the very same person, then grew up side by side like brothers who never got a choice. Maybe it was because Alec was still just a kid then, so he never once heard a word from his grandfather, until he finally spills the truth about Giles' death, something that happened about 7 years ago. But like he expected, Watson had no clue that death was already closing in on him. The guildmaster was thrown into shock, and after that he'd cut off word from his brother ages ago. Right then, the protagonist leaned in and demanded he explain everything about the sage before he headed off to start a new life in the village. If curiosity had gotten this far, Watson wasn't about to shut down the conversation. The two grew up side by side in the same village. Then, an epidemic tore through town and wiped out nearly everyone. Everyone sat there like they were clocking in. For the moment, death finally showed up, until a certain someone finally crashed the moment. That day they were one step away from dying. That epidemic didn't just happen, a curse spat it into the world, and those two were running on fumes with barely any mana left. In the end, they swallowed their doubts, followed that mysterious visitor, and learned to wield magic like pros. While Watson took over the Mage Guild, Gale was already making a name as a full-blown adventurer, so the old lord of the lands cooked up the clan system, hoping to keep Gale close. Alec was left reeling. This huge, life-changing thing had sprung straight from his grandfather's influence. 50 years ago, right in the middle of the war, the Kars Empire blasted 3,000 soldiers to that very place. The sage single-handedly slaughtered half their end in the army. He took care of 1,000 of them with annihilating ease. This is the tale of Volks, and in this city, not a single soul has a shred of doubt about who he is. But when Guile finally hit 33, tragedy slammed him. His partner and lover were killed in battle. That disaster tore his world apart, forced him to hang up his adventurer gear, and made him pack up and flee the city. Alec can't stop thinking about it. This was never just a parallel. Because after Mia died, he turned into the adventure. Their situations looked the same at first, but then everything flipped, and the truth went totally the other way. And just like that, Watson can't stop wondering, was Billy doing okay too? Back then, he was the commander who pulled his brother out and retreated to the village right when the protagonist stepped in and declared that the village leader was loved by everyone. But over 2 weeks ago, the village got smashed by an army that nobody could trace back to any known origin. They sprinted in and lit the houses on fire, and slaughtered every single resident. Watson just got dropped clean, an absolute perfect shot. The only ones left standing were that trio of young adventurers. They'd somehow made survival their first mission. Even the guild leader stared in disbelief at this total nonsense. But Alec is convinced those knights weren't acting on their own. They were soldiers, taking orders from someone in the shadows. And somehow the two ended up staring at each other in silence, like everything just clicked. If it really was the Empire, then everything changes. The protagonist rushed to the ducal family and broke the news the wise man was gone. As the old man sinks into deep thought about all of this, he leaps to his feet, apologizing fast because he had to go talk to the Lord. Watson would catch Alec later, but right now the kid was just thrilled to have a chance to chat for a bit. Before all that, his great-uncle stopped him and told him to wait a minute, apologizing for not reaching out sooner, then insisting he call anytime he needs anything. The protagonist thanks him again right to his face. After all that, he finally blurted out his request for permission to leave. Watson needs to hunt down everyone who hit the village, while Alex sinks into the mission, tracking more people to bring into his clan. Time passes. Then Rouge Howard, a young man with serious talent, showed up at the White Wisdom the clan's house and walked in as Viscount Howard's third son, already a level 15 swordsman. This time, Rouge stormed in to chase his dream and land a make-or-break interview. The moment he knocked, Mary popped into view and welcomed him like she'd been waiting. She would steer him through the house like she already had the whole plan, because she knew he'd be walking straight into that interview. The young man desperately steadies his breathing, clinging to the thought that he still has the Swordsman's Guild recommendation letter. At last, he burst into the meeting room. The moment he stepped in, Alec was there, welcoming him right away. Rouge drops into an immediate bow before the great-grandson of the wise man, and pure honor floods her chest. The protagonist thanks him for his kindness, then throws his name out there like, by the way, After the way they welcomed him, the swordsman realizes that in this clan, his noble name shouldn't matter, only he himself does. The protagonist gets right into it, and introduces Jilly, a level 50 hunter, who's basically like a brother to him. Rouge was stunned by what he heard, but he still faced him with the exact same greeting. And then there was Anna, the other sister, who was already a legit talented mage, even at just 7 years old. Even with the pressure crushing in, Rouge kept his cool. Inside, doubt swirled in his chest as everything he heard started to feel wrong. And then there was Alec, battle-hardened and sharp as a blade, with alchemy in his bones. He's decided to rip through the magical items, pocket most of their materials, and sell the rest for profit. Again, this struggling swordsman looks around and realizes every direction is packed with absolute prodigies. And besides Vac, the clanmaster carried 2 brutal jobs that forced him to stain his own hands with blood so shocking it didn't feel real. Alright, that wraps up the introductions for good. Instead, the protagonist tells Rouge to spill a bit about himself, but first, the young man begged them to wait a moment because he was dying to find out how they got so strong. Naturally, all 3 snap to the village getting wrecked, and then silence slams down on them. Then Alec blurts that his grandfather taught him, Jilly learned from her father, and on top of that, they'd both drilled with Lilienthal in team lessons. And just like that, that name hit Rouge with another jaw-dropper of a surprise. That's because Lilienthal, aka Lily, was a legendary powerhouse everyone feared and admired. And yeah, Anna trained under those two too, just like before. And somehow she rocketed to level 15 in only 2 weeks. That's wild. Rouge was so desperate to get in with the White Wisdom that it was driving her out of her mind. Wisdom didn't just show up, he learned it from his grandfather, one of the White Owl's creators, under Gyla. He set his sights on becoming the one under the wise man's successor's watch. He vowed to drag his family out of ruin, so he trained to become a shield knight. With the protagonist's sharp wisdom guiding him, he'd find the perfect path no matter what. Alec finally caves only if he agrees to hang up being a knight. He'd heard whispers of his grandfather, Cain Howard. Cain was a shield knight who stood between his team and the fire, smashing back dragon attacks with pure grit. That story's a legend, everyone knows, but yeah, some folks still laugh it off as pure fantasy. Alec flat out tells him knights can't pull off something like this. This takes a totally different caliber. That's because Roush's grandpa wasn't a knight at all, he was a guardian. They've got aura powers built to shield their crew, no matter what's coming for them. It felt just like Kadia martial arts. Once you hit level 30, you could learn it in a bunch of different ways. But somehow Rouge's father and grandfather never so much as mentioned any of those details. Tane died while his son was still a kid, and his grandson grew up with barely any real stories about him. All that remained was the legend he'd been a legendary swordsman. Rouge could barely wrap his head around it. His own grandfather wasn't anything like that. But the protagonist thinks, maybe I can become a guardian too. He had to switch careers and he already knew exactly which tools he'd need to make it work. Still, Alec didn't let up. He made sure the young man was completely on board. Guardians hit way softer than knights, and grinding levels without teammates watching your back was brutal. Being a lone hunter of that life, honestly, it felt pointless, like showing up to a war with nobody to back you up. The thought of ending up useless hits Rouge like a truck. He flashes back to everyone calling him the black sheep of the family. Back during the war, he had plenty of chances to stand in front and shield his companions on the front lines. But once peace settled in, protecting them got way more complicated. So he had to stop and think hard. Did he truly want to walk the same path as his grandfather? Rouge had dreamed of big, unforgettable achievements for as long as she could remember. And it wasn't only Kane, his father and brother had been chasing his path too, every step of the way. After pausing for a breath, the moment the young man rises, he drops to his knees. Finally, he fires back that he'll offer his shield to Alec, then leans in and asks Alec to teach him everything he knows. The protagonist nods, slams the decision in place, and commits, promising to make him a guardian. And he would set up a bright, booming stage where the young man could finally light up and shine. Rouge leans in, blurts out a heartfelt thank you, and vows she'll become seriously helpful from here on out. Later, Alec double-checks that there's one more person left on the list to assess the next day. If the next day's candidate was the right fit, they'd blast through the interviews. Meanwhile, Jilly couldn't shake her worry for the protagonist, and honestly, he'd been burning himself out, doing everything single-handedly. Alec bursts into laughter, then shoots back that he's totally fine. Now, they didn't have to worry about whether he'd make it. The very next day at the Martial Arts Guild, that kid got pushed forward and right in front of everyone recommended straight to the Silver Clan. He couldn't wrap his head around it. How could the guildmaster pull a move like this, knowing full well he was basically dead weight in a group? The group presses on, ignoring his complaints, as the master shoves the documents into his hands and tells him to go crush the interview. Then Hastel sprinted to meet Alec, because the interview was happening the very same day he got hit with that news. The protagonist double-checked every detail on his application, like his whole future depended on it. Hastel's taijutsu was level 5, and he'd basically thrown in the towel on dodging. He went all in on offense. Hearing talk like that makes the martial artist huff a heavy, frustrated sigh. Martial artists used a whole arsenal of dodging tricks back in the day. That evasive style was everywhere, and you'd spot it at a glance. But this time, Hastel didn't hold back. He zeroed in on the offense with total focus. People swore guys like him were useless, and he could practically read their minds. Then, to his total shock, the protagonist flipped that whole difference into something good. Still, Haas refuses to hold back. He's going all in on offense. So he can finally blast out a real Hadouken. Hastel himself had no clue a skill like that even existed, and his whole face lit up like he just struck gold. It was a rare special move you could master, but only when the exact conditions lined up. Still, Alec couldn't shake the shock because he'd expected the boy's goal would have been clear from the very start. The boy swears it's true, but every time he goes asking other people, they shoot him down, saying a skill that strong simply can't exist. It didn't look like a trick everyone knew. When Rouge was just a kid, his whole village got smashed by a rampaging stone golem. A lone adventurer crushed it with nothing but his bare fists. His family was dead broke and couldn't afford a weapon. So this kid snapped and decided to battle with nothing but his own body. Rouge dreamed of one day being so strong he could smash a stone golem with nothing but his bare hands. But life didn't cut him any slack. No crew wanted him, because he couldn't dodge worth a damn. He barely got a chance to level up, and he had to grind through brutal hardships using nothing but medicinal herbs. What a wild, complicated road. Alec nods like, yeah, these martial artists might as well be useless. And it crushes the poor guy's heart. But he still trusted. Hastel would be fine because the protagonist was smart enough to patch him up anytime things got bad. So that's why they could team up under the White Wisdom. Even though his training would be brutal, he knew he had to prep first. Hostiel was so over the moon about getting accepted that he said he'd take anything then. Finally, they slammed into the end of the interviews. And before anyone could blink, several days had already ripped past. The team suddenly got 2 brand new recruits, and they had to level up fast. But before any of that, Alec insisted they slow down and truly get to know each other first. Rouge steps forward to introduce himself, and Hasdal's shoulders lock up because the guy's level 15. And then there was Lorraine, level 14 thief, ready to steal. The two stare at the last recruit, He stays stone silent, and you can practically feel his nerves rattling. At last, the boy snaps his name into the conversation, calls himself a martial artist, and brags that he's level 12. Now, Alec finally got the chance to lead them straight to his training ground, a hidden underwater cave where the darkness closes in, and the next step could change everything. Right before they stepped inside, the leader laid out exactly how everything worked. Lorraine would hunt down the enemy on sight and charge in to strike first, no delay, no mercy. Then she could fire off every monster detail straight to Rouge. She raised her shield, blocking incoming hits and darting out of the way to yank their focus right onto her. Finally, Anna's lightning magic will rip them apart for good. Hastel's spiraling because the world gave him 0 tasks, and that silence is freaking him out. Alec leans in and explains the martial artist needs to pelt them with stones and lock in, firing his spirit like it's weaponized. That kind of responsibility felt way too light for him. There was no way he'd show up for battles and pretend it was enough. The protagonist snaps at him to shut up and tells him it was all training, plain and simple. Don't overthink it. Just trust him for now and let it ride. At last, they all get herded into the cave. Lorraine bolts ahead and leads the way. Suddenly, the hustle starts realizing this training is going to be brutal. Turns out, the thief was the one who lured the monster's attention right on to them. Rouge shoved himself in front and took the hit head-on, blocking every strike that came for him. Finally, Anna ripped open the sky with her magic, and it fully sealed the deal. Alec leans in and praises the crew for actually nailing the basics in real life. And he even warns the Guardian go for shield strikes, because the second they get sent back, landing a hit on them turns way more complicated. Next time, Hastel better be careful when he throws that stone. The boy blurts out an apology, and the protagonist tells him they've got to keep pushing through the cave. No stopping now. They run it all back again, replaying the exact same steps like the story refuses to move on. Hassel was struggling like crazy, barely able to hurl his stones. Alec can't help but point out that Anna finally leveled up. Now her spells hit way harder than before. The others break into praise, cheering her on for every ounce of effort she put in. But the martial artist stays locked in deep, quiet reflection. And let's be real, she was the boss's sister, so everyone knew favoritism was coming for her. It wasn't any of his business, but Hastel's discomfort practically screamed in his face, until Alec blurts out that the kid even leveled up too. His kai swelled to a size he'd never reached before. Even the boy didn't clock it, like his instincts were tuned way too sharp. Maybe it was the team's hard-earned experience, or the way he kept sharpening himself through non-stop spirit training. The leader claps his back and praises him for crushing it. And you can tell he'll soon learn how to perfect that killer move. At this pace, he's going to be the first one on the team to snatch his dream. Pastel finally nods and agrees, because soon he'll be strong enough to stand toe-to-toe with the others. For now, they push deeper into the cave, going further in no matter what waited ahead. Now that he finally saw his evolution clearly, the martial artist clenched his resolve and vowed he's not stopping here. He was ready to hurl as many stones as it took, and trust his leader to the very end. Lorraine can't stop thinking about that conversation and how to chase the dream she wants. There was no way that stuff could ever fill an empty stomach. Meanwhile, deep inside the royal capital, the buzz wouldn't quit. Christian burst through the corridors, hunting for the princess. He barged into the room where she was, and then he spotted the girl kneeling there, praying with her whole heart. The princess just wrapped up everything and snapped her attention to the report she was about to get. Chris leans in and tells her about a wise man's village that got totally wiped out. Nobody knew who was behind it yet, but you could practically feel the Empire's fingerprints all over it. He leans in and asks the girl what they should do, and she goes quiet for a moment, weighing the choice in her head. For now, the princess urges them to slow their moves because if her brother catches on, everything blows up. In her head, she cackled because everything played out exactly how she planned, until the wise man's protection illusion snapped like a lie. Gone for good. And finally, it was time to kick off the fun full-on war, baby. Meanwhile, Lorraine was riding high, grinning like crazy because they'd just crushed those massive monsters, wondering just how much cash those materials could rake in. Hasto snaps her back to reality. This whole mess was never hers to control. It was the clan's to decide. The boss tried to turn those creatures into profit, but it still stung him. He couldn't shake the sadness of not making a single cent from them. Rouge totally gets what they're feeling, but if Alec hadn't shown up, they never would have been able to hunt down so many monsters. Right then, the martial artist couldn't stop staring at his new leader, soaking in every detail like it was pure power. And on top of that, he rants that the thief doesn't even bother to clean up the monsters. Anna can't stop wondering why Lorraine turned into a thief. Alec told her that clearing out monsters was the work of thieves and hunters because only people with real skill with their hands could do it. And just like that, the room falls into the most brutally awkward silence, because Lorraine is the only one standing there doing nothing, until she finally shuts the topic and pivots to the very first time that mage ever spoke to her. The thief practically buzzes with excitement, leaning in like, "Tell me, Anna, were you maybe interested in me?" Alex shoots his chance, then slips a certain paper straight into the girl's hands. It was a marketplace tally monster parts listed with cold prices for every single piece. As Anna herself put it, he'd hand off the gruesome cleaning of the bodies to the hunters and thieves. If she wanted, she could take the fight straight into her own hands and deliver the final blow to those creatures. Lorraine had to scrutinize that list with total precision, because the clan's meals now depended on her. The protagonist turns to everyone and gives a heartfelt thanks for stepping in, and for putting up with it all with that crazy patience. On the third day trapped inside that cave, the entire group was wiped out, bone-tired and running on fumes. Even with the leader pushing every scrap of hearing, they were still stuck in this exact nightmare. Straying past a schedule that only allowed 3 straight days was way too difficult to handle. Meanwhile, Alec and Anna were totally fine. So fine it freaked the new guys out, because they still had 2 more days of exploring inside. Exactly because Anna was totally okay. Hastil and Rouge refused to back down, pride burning too hot for them to even falter. Alec beams at Lorraine, praising her for pushing back the monsters and snagging all the materials. He told her, "Don't look that sad, just 2 more days, and then everyone finally gets to rest." The moment she heard it, she knew she'd be getting paid 20,000. The thief snapped back to attention. 4 days later, everyone rolled back home and our protagonist felt the spark again. Because it was go time to prep the supplies, even after they'd already hauled in tons of materials. Lorraine busted her ass, and because of that, Alec could finally handle the clan's expenses without breaking a sweat. Before he could even start working, Mary came barreling in to warn him there was a visitor coming. A cranky old woman showed up claiming she came straight from the orphanage. The second the protagonist headed over to see her, the woman smiled and greeted him with perfect politeness. Right as Lorraine finally slipped back to the clan's house, she spotted Director Lana sprawled on the couch. The orphanage director finally spilled the truth Dial had been hiding, that he was adopted. Also, the others wouldn't get dragged into somebody's trap. And seeing Lorraine join the wise man's grandson's clan, that was absolutely amazing. Alex tells it like this somehow. Him and the thief feel almost related because he too was an orphan, raised by his grandfather. Guile held his teachings on a tight leash, but that ruthless discipline is exactly what catapulted him to the top. Now he stood there with his friend and his little sister too, like a family that wasn't tied by blood. Somewhere deep inside, the protagonist didn't just want anything they craved. One thing, a place where they could finally feel safe. Lorraine couldn't shake the feeling that Alec was nothing more than an innocent, spoiled rich kid, especially with the wise man's grandson flaunting his life in a mansion. Even little Anna, still so young, grew stronger every day and pushed herself to work hard. Lana was certain those two were safe around Alec, but something about it still gnawed at her, and she couldn't shake it. For the last few years, a mysterious benefactor kept slipping donations to the orphanage, one gift at a time. The chaos began the moment Lorraine stormed out of the orphanage, and the woman swore it had to be the girl's fault, even if she never once worked up the courage to ask straight to her face. Right before that, another donation showed up the day prior, and it rattled the director because whoever's stealing has to be pulling something risky. Lorraine couldn't stop reliving her whole life in her mind, which was always packed with nail-biting chaos. Even though she'd learned to steal, she used those skills to swipe from the bad guys. But above all, the director made it clear Lorraine had to break free and live her own life. Still, the girl couldn't stop worrying about the other kids back at the orphanage. The protagonist said they were hunting for materials and digging into dungeon mysteries. And as long as they stayed side by side, Lana didn't have to worry about that girl at all. That made the director exhale in pure relief, because she could finally trust the wise man's successor to handle this. Lorraine dropped into her seat and started digging into her thoughts. She froze in surprise as Alex slid up beside her and caught her there. He didn't even clock that she'd come back, so he blurted out everything about the director's visit. Right then, the thief played dumb, acting like she hadn't heard a word because she was determined to keep Lana's life worry-free. With that, she snapped the moment and bolted out fast. At night, the girl locked herself in her room alone with the dark. She froze in the room when the leader himself showed up to pay her a visit. After the orphanage director's words, he couldn't stop replaying what he'd just heard, and something kept nagging at him. Alec even pushed for his own clan to open their hearts and start making donations too. Lorraine got totally blindsided. She just couldn't see any reason he would do something like that. The protagonist leaned in and told his story. His grandfather drilled it into him. Use your power to help people, not yourself. But no matter what he tried, he could never save anyone, and at least Alex still wanted one thing: to protect the people around him and stand strong for them. Even Lorraine was dragged into the chaos. He held her close because she was part of his clan family in every way that mattered. His words ripped open old memories, and the girl suddenly realized she'd been treated like a sister too. After that burst of laughter, she grinned and told him, "From now on, you're basically my brother too." At the same time, you could bet Anna was about to explode with irritation. So that's what snapped her back around and made her change her mind. Instead, Lorraine would snap boss to him and shut down Alex's opinion like it didn't matter. The moment the protagonist stepped out of the room, he replayed that interview with the girl in his head. Because even before the thief's motive was obvious, she was already dead set on making money. She jumped at the chance to work for the clan without ever hearing what the other conditions were. Right at the start, the hero didn't even have a clue who he was. His past was a total mystery to him. But with everything on the line, Lorraine couldn't ignore one thing: his clan could help way more than anyone else. Now he'd finally locked in every single profession he needed. As the clan swelled and finally steadied, the dream shifted. Now it could grow bigger, live better, and give them a real future. Alec pushed to level everyone up before Jilly could slam his work done and come barreling back home. That's why the whole crew charged straight for Goblin Island next. And when they checked in, every single person looked fired up and ready to grind. Alec decides to kick things off by laying out exactly what they're tasked with on that island. He jabbed at the map where they'd been, then clocked another port on the far side, plus a whole fishing village tucked nearby. They could start lining up their shots, aiming straight for that mine right in the heart of the island. This small village was home to the miners, and they begged for goblins to be wiped out no mercy. The real prize was the Goblin King, but if he could wipe out 20 of the little nightmares along the way, that would be a win too. Anna blurts out, "Wait, are these monsters supposed to be normal?" The protagonist tells them, "Most of them are ordinary, sure, but we've also gotten sightings of archers, shamans, and even leaders." As they push closer to the island's heart, the fights would only get tougher, because the goblin nest might be waiting over on the other side, near the mines. It's the same playbook as that submerged cave, only now Lorraine joins in and helps wipe out the goblins too. She stared in shock, totally blindsided, and standing there unready for a task this huge. Anna even showed up with advice. Stop spiraling and just outsmart them with tricks. Once the plan was locked in, they raced straight for the village, sitting right by the mines. Along the way, they mowed down 10 goblins like it was nothing, and it hardly felt like a real challenge. Anna couldn't stop praising Lorraine for dropping a monster with one single strike, even as Lorraine wrestled with her own conflicted feelings. It didn't take long before the village finally snapped into view on the horizon. Alec pushed forward anyway, and it instantly freaked Rouge out because going first could get him killed. But the protagonist cut through everyone's worries, saying it would all be fine so the others could chill and wait while he took a break. The moment he stepped out, Hastel leaned in and praised the leader's rock-solid confidence and flawless prep. And Rouge nodded, saying it could be the wise man's knowledge passed down, or maybe Slurren's divine hand guiding everything. Anna couldn't stop herself from asking, and the Guardian finally leaned in and started telling her the story of Slurren. The kingdom's faith barely reached anyone, so regular people, none of them nobles, had no idea it even existed. Slurren was the god of light, and honestly, he might have been one of the most powerful beings around. They say Slurren rules life and light itself, spawning every god, dragon, and power to exist. And even the rain hangs on in awe of the tale. Right then, Alec came back, grinning, as he said he'd rented a tiny room so they could finally sleep. As night swallowed the streets, the protagonist hustled to swap out the watch, no time to waste. The martial artist stared in shock because it was still way too early, yet the mage couldn't even manage a good night's sleep. It wasn't just nerves. His expectations were so sky-high they practically shoved him into the spotlight. He told me, "I've been dreaming of becoming an adventurer since I was a kid, like it was always the one thing he was meant to chase." Changing gears, Alec pressed the kid about Shikuchi, and the boy nodded, saying he'd been doing it exactly as ordered. The moment the protagonist heard that Shikuchi would actually crack the Goblin King, joy exploded in his chest. But still, just one shot, one single chance, and then it was gone. This thing was nothing like what they'd faced before. It hit totally different. Focus was absolutely vital. The very next day, the whole crew kept pushing forward, racing to reach the far side of the island. During the goblin attack, the girls fought side by side and had each other's backs the whole time. Seeing them push through, Alec couldn't help but praise them, especially that thief, who was finally starting to get the hang of the job. And as they pushed forward, the monsters kept leveling up stronger with every step. As he sits there, lost in thought, replaying everything in his head. Then they suddenly realized a bunch of goblins had crowded in around them. Among them stood a leader who looked harmless at first, but everyone knew he could become deadly fast. The group combat ignited, and every fighter locked in on their own monster to handle. When Rouge's shield flipped, and Anna rushed in to back him up with her magic. Lorraine struck again, killing another soul while staying perfectly hidden. And finally, they slammed the last move home and won the battle. Alex said they'd finally smashed through the 20 goblin quota, and the whole crew had moved like a perfectly synced team. Hastel quickly realized something. Those monsters didn't just appear out of nowhere. There was a path right back to where they came from. They raced down the road, and, right there, they stumbled onto the nest where the creatures made their home. This wasn't some run-of-the-mill crowd archers and chiefs packed in together, and honestly, that part didn't come as a shock. Alec nodded and agreed to hunt them down, and Hastel burst out in pure shock. Even Rouge hit the floor in disbelief. There were way too many for them to handle. But the protagonist snapped them back to calm and said he'd join the fight this time. Lorraine snapped that the goblins had clocked them, snatching the moment and running with it. The leader sprang to his feet and unleashed a spell that sent every creature bursting into the air, vanishing in seconds. And with that, the real hunt was finally about to kick off. The protagonist told Rouge to yank the leader's attention away while Anna cut their numbers down. While the leader holds up protection and barriers, he shouts for Lorraine to sneak in from behind the creatures and hunt down the weaker ones first. Meanwhile, Hastel has to shield Anna until Alec finally carves out the opening they need. This was no ordinary job, so the mage had to put his trust in the martial artist. For real. The fight keeps raging until the Guardian finally hits a wall and can't hold off all those attacks hitting at once. Finally, he shoves those creatures back with everything he's got, and the mage snaps the moment into his hands, blasting a blazing fire attack. Just like we feared, and when the attacks hit, they were downright mind-blowing. But a flaming arrow was coming, and she had to shield it with every ounce of her strength. That's when the shaman who lived finally struck back right there, with the attack that should have ended everything. And right away, Lorraine was the one who stepped in and took care of him. But even so, more and more kept on showing up, and the crowd kept growing. Rouge feels like he's still somehow keeping the front line from collapsing. He pushed past this moment with one goal so he could break even higher than before and become stronger than ever. With that, the Guardian goads the monsters and dares them to swarm him. And just like that, the leader's charge hit way harder than everyone else's way stronger, and it caught everyone off guard. The support finally showed up, and healing rushed straight into Rouge's wounds, and shoved the goblin back as if he was breaking free. Alec was a total lifesaver, and it lit a fire under him, like he finally believed he could go all the way. While each of them cracked on with their jaw, they were right on the edge of finally taking care of everybody. One Hastel ripped through the group, shouting that the Goblin King was finally here. Even though the monster in front of him was massive, brutal, and downright terrifying, Rouge had to grit her teeth and survive for 2 more long minutes. The protagonist barked at the martial artists, ordering them to start preparing right away. Lorraine slipped in from behind, trying to close the distance without alerting anyone. But the Goblin King clocked her the second she stepped into view. She barely dodged his brutal strike at the last second, which left her wondering if they could really survive that long. Alex snaps at Anna to slam a blazing wall of fire right in the middle, and she snaps her hand forward, casting her magic in a flash. Meanwhile, Hastel clenched his teeth and stayed razor-focused, pouring everything he had into using his spirit. He refused to slip up on the timing and zeroed in on the job with full, relentless focus. To help Alec, he cast an enchantment that supercharges his fists. Even with all that practice, he can't shake the doubt. Can he actually pull this off? But since his leader was putting his whole trust in him right now, he couldn't risk letting him down. Finally, Hastel came sprinting for the Goblin King, ready to unleash his Shikuchi. His fist blazed, launching Hadouken punches straight into the monster. The other adventurers snapped to a stop, stunned into silence. The whole battle ended with one brutal blow. So yeah, Hastel took the win, plain and simple. Lorraine came sprinting over, out of breath, just to praise him. Still, all the young guys could do was burst into loud, uncontrollable laughter. Alec marched up to congratulate him, and right then he locked in his MVP title of the day. That's when Hastel blurted out, "My friends call me Hattie," and demanded they call him the same, and the protagonist nodded and agreed, no hesitation, just a gut yes. You nodded, then cracked a quick fist bump with him, until Lorraine finally snapped that she too wanted to be friends with her leader. She even pulled off the impossible, snatching the Goblin King's crown as her treasure. Right after Hastel attacked him, the girl snatched the chance and stole the prized item, something worth a whopping 20,000 if she sold it. And when Rouge realized Alec was leaving him behind, he bolted off too, hoping Alec would treat him more casually. Then out of nowhere, he boldly declared himself Hastel's rival. Anna admitted she couldn't shake the feeling that, deep down, the goblins deserved a little sympathy. Because those monsters weren't just roaming wild, they had their own homes to protect. The protagonist told her to stop worrying because the monsters were multiplying at an insane pace. At last, after that brutal long journey, the whole group sprinted back to the clan's house. He leaned in, ready to spill everything about what happened while they were gone. But just before that, someone burst onto the scene. But then Jilly, who finally came back, having pulled off the impossible, switching his whole life over to become a sniper. After he tore back from the royal capital, he went straight and picked up a brand new set of clothes. A young man rode with a caravan until those third-rate bandits finally struck and turned the whole trip into chaos. In the end, Jilly handled every single one of them alone. And on the way back, he rode that same caravan until it got slammed by the wife brims and everything turned into chaos. 2 of those monsters showed up, but they barely gave them any trouble. That hooked Alec instantly, he knew. No, they had absolutely no business being anywhere near the royal capital. Again, Gilly tore through them, crushed the wyverns, and finally got his revenge. Mary apologized for butting into their conversation. But right there, someone was already waiting for the clan master. Just as they hurried into the meeting room, there they were, Kane and Hans. The second Hans spotted the protagonist. His tears burst out with pure relief. Thank God he was safe. Alex seized the moment and introduced those 2 men to the rest of the clan. Hans, a merchant from the village they used to call home, stormed into the city to sell his grandfather's potions. Kane was a traveling bard who'd show up once a year, right on schedule, like clockwork. The bard swears he tracked down the merchant in the capital, then admits it had been ages since he last set foot back in the village. But the second the 2 showed up, they stared at a place that had been wrecked completely. Hans was hunting for fresh places to sell, and he had zero clue what just went down. The village looked shattered and hopeless, but somehow they still hadn't found Alex's body. That's why both of them took off from the royal capital, hunting him down and refusing to stop until they found him. Kane strides up and throws his arms out for a hug, telling Alec he's done insanely well so far. Just when the vibe was finally perfect, the bard burst in, snapped, and had to bolt, only stopping to say hello before he left. So he swings his goodbye to the others and slips out, bidding them farewell. And he hints he's heading straight for the Car's empire. Since he had no origins, he had to learn everything the hard way. Then, if he stumbled on anything important, he'd race back to report it. Right before he left, Kane slammed the brakes and talked to the protagonist one more time. He shoots him a warning about the black dog, but refuses to spill a single detail. So he storms off and tells her, maybe Abby can tag along with me on my next visit. Jilly points him out and says he's always in motion, like the wind never staying in the same spot for even a second. Alec clocked the way Kane knew everything, and couldn't shake the thought this guy might be a reincarnated twin to him. But even when he let a few questions from his old world slip out, the bard didn't flinch, didn't react at all, like he understood nothing. Maybe Kane was just some walking encyclopedia. He'd have been the perfect ride or die to hang with, and a friend he could trust with his life, always ready when the world turned dangerous. The protagonist is freaking out about his trip to the Car's empire, and Jilly tells him, trust me, once you've got Kaney in your corner, you'll be totally fine. Hans nodded and agreed on the spot, because the traveler was the rare type who always knew exactly when it was time to run. Even with everything going on, Halleck couldn't shake the dread clawing at his gut. That's when Anna shot Hans a question, where did he plan to go this time? But now that he'd been kicked out and left homeless, the very same merchant was completely lost. So the protagonist leaned in and urged the man to join his clan. Even though Hans was just a merchant, he was the group's secret weapon, perfect for hawking their goods and potions to anyone who'd listen. Alec knew one thing for sure. He had to get Hans's skills, no matter what. And you could trust him totally, no doubts. Those praise-filled words hit him like a spark, and just like that, he was ready to join the clan. With that, Mary seized the moment and started getting the second-floor room ready. Right now, she's running the clan with Melissa in her corner, so getting Hans on the team would be a huge win. In the Chronicles of Dagard, packing your clan with merchants and skilled artisans was pure gold, because here, in this world, it was all totally different. Maybe it's because everyone keeps copying Giles's clan, and suddenly the artisans vanish like they were never there. So Alec can't help but wonder why nobody wants to become a guardian, especially when they don't even know about the explosive Hadouken. Maybe they were trying to cripple the adventurers before they ever got strong. Meanwhile, Watson was getting hit with a fresh report about every search they'd run, as far as they could tell from the Sade. For 7 long years, the ducal family had absolutely no clue he was dead. And to make it worse, not a single official report ever showed up about the village attack. They were dodging the truth at any price, and it felt weirdly intense. The Duchy must have gotten those records, but they had no clue what Giles's loss really meant. Roughly 7 years ago, the poor guy who'd been delivering those reports got replaced by a complete stranger. Some mystery person snatched those reports right out of their hands, leaving them with nothing but loss. Watson can't shake the feeling that the Empire is behind it all. But that would mean they'd learned about the sages who vanished 7 years ago, and then they'd have stormed the village back then. That's when the guildmaster's eyes widened because he finally saw it. The royal capital itself might be behind everything. Gale wasn't just an amazing adventurer, he was the kingdom's guardian, so the moment news of his death hit, everything would fall into chaos. So yeah, this gives us even more fuel to go straight to the Area Lord and hammer out our side over this loss. He wanted to blurt out one thing: whoever caused this mess has a secret motive lurking behind it. There's another force driving the whole game, one they haven't uncovered yet. So they better start gearing up because the Empire's move is coming, and they can't be caught off guard. Felicia Black led Cerberus Special Forces every mission under her control, the so-called Black Dog. At the very least, they can be sure of one thing. Felicia was the one who called the shots and ordered the attack on that village. She was pure mystery, then she struck out of nowhere with wild, bizarre attacks that left everyone reeling. If the Black Dog got wind of the sage's death, they were about to be in deep, deadly trouble. Meanwhile, Felicia herself caught wind of the Tenryu Festival, and he felt downright thrilled because this was going to be a huge win and a massive help. While all that chaos unfolded, Alex's clan somehow pushed through and wiped out the goblins. Hastel's confidence skyrocketed from that day on, and he lit a fire under his companions to keep pushing forward. The crew kept pushing harder and harder, grinding through boss after boss to get even stronger. And because they busted their tails, they all finally hit level 30. Totally as expected. Putting them all on the same power level was the perfect move, so they could team up without anyone feeling like they got left in the dust. Hans burst into the protagonist's office and checked right away whether there were any potions up for sale. Anxiety clawed at him because the orders piled up like crazy. People loved them so much that the demand never stopped. Even with all that, they were still scrambling to dodge any big, massive orders. While the argument raged on, sudden knocks slammed on the door. Out of nowhere, a knight showed up, demanded permission to come in, and then just kicked the door open and marched right inside. She was Henrietta Pendragon, San, the lord of the city's daughter, and the one who led the Silver Wyvern into battle. Right next to her stood her brother, begging her forgiveness for Henrietta's wild, impulsive mess. In the end, they finally got ushered in, pulled up a seat, and started talking face to face. The brother proudly unveiled his sister as a holy knight. You almost never saw noble ladies charging into the front lines like she did. Her brother was Polk Pendragon, 1 whole year younger than her. He stepped up as the sub-leader, wielding his power as a mage. Besides those two, their butler Seth showed up too, a high-level monk in disguise. All right, here's what the young man was itching to talk about. The Celestial Dragon Festival is set for next month. Alec had heard about it. This celebration crowned the Demon Duke's ceiling, the very one who'd attacked Volks. But Polk warned that festival days always unleash a wave of crimes right when everyone's celebrating. They set up security and demanded the White Wisdom clan's full cooperation too. After all that pushback, the protagonist finally caved. Turns out they really were tied to the city. Right then, the two men clasped hands, grinning with polished, polite smiles. Alec didn't even have to wait long to clock the truth. Those siblings looked like adventurers, but they operated like landlords all the way. Henry insisted her attitude was truly solid, then couldn't help boasting about it a little. Then Seth finally spoke up, and you could feel the tension break. What a relief. He leaned in and reminded his lady that they weren't there for just one reason. Alec couldn't stop himself. He had to know what it was. At last, the butler bowed low and begged the mage for an autograph. And he even insisted he write it for Henrietta on it. The girl didn't just respect him. She looked at the great sage Giles' successor like he was pure legend. Henrietta instantly blushed when Seth cut through the small talk and went straight for the point. Even with everything going sideways, the protagonist didn't hesitate for a second. She signed for her anyway. The moment the negotiations wrapped up, the two siblings bounced out with smiles on their faces. They were a weird, non-stop dynamic duo, two forces that just kept hitting like thunder. She was another princess from the royal family, but the vibe around her felt totally different. From the way the siblings were acting, you could tell Henrietta was bursting with curiosity. That's when it hit him. He remembered the work he still had to do, so he bolted back fast. The very next day, Hastel raced in with the tools the protagonist had demanded. He couldn't help but stare. His leader was mixing alchemy like a master to brew those potions. Alec told me he picked this second job because selling materials wasn't enough. He wanted to chase bigger money. Once alchemy leveled up, it didn't just get stronger. It became a brutal weapon during battles. That talk lit a spark in the protagonist's head. Suddenly they realized they could talk about the advanced classes with the whole group. And right then, he hauled everyone to the table to hash it out. Lorraine said she never dreamed she'd level up this hard. Hastel nodded like, yeah, same. Rouge snapped back that, as a guardian, he was going to forge himself into a walking tank. But even Anna didn't stop for a second to wonder what her future would look like. Then Alec threw everyone for a loop by announcing he was dead set on grabbing the necromancer class. Instead of settling for sage life, he kept eyeing a whole other class, plotting to steal that path for himself. All he'd have to do is push his dark magic a little further, and boom, he'd step into necromancer territory. To become a sage, he'd have to crank up his white magic because the main character was determined to master healing and resurrection at the same time, so he forced himself to train both. Boosting his alchemy power would let him unlock the ultimate necromancer, cheat crafting brand new creations. The whole group stared in awe at just how relentless Alec's determination was. A mage who cranks up dark magic fits the bill, while a sorcerer keeps blasting forward with pure offensive spells. That hit Anna like a flash of insight. Polk wasn't just a sorcerer, he was one at heart, too. She couldn't help it every time she came across the dead. Fear hit her like a punch. She craved power not just for herself, but to shield her brother, so she decided to go on the offensive. Rouge started out dreaming of becoming a knight, but then fate flipped the script. She chose the path of a guardian instead. Lorraine, though, took Alec's idea to heart and decided to try her hand at stealing treasures or cutting down targets as an assassin. The girl couldn't help but get excited at the thought of hunting down real treasures. And if she really was a level 50 hunter teaming up with a level 30 thief, then yeah, she could pull that off. Jilly Hunter and the clan's vice leader was going to step in and become the thief's teacher sooner or later. Still, she muttered that those guys were always so quiet and honestly impossible to get through to. Alex said you can even master the assassin class built for stealth, fueled by sharp intelligence, and designed to wreck enemies with offense. While Lorraine stewed over her next move, Hastel leaned in and pressed her for answers about himself. So the protagonist snaps back, saying the only way out is to level up to 50 and become the 5th saint. If he cranked up his white mage, he could even level into a monk. But that wasn't the path his heart was chasing. If that's the only road left, then he has no choice. He'll become a 5th saint and hammer his skills into perfection. From a distance, you could already tell they finally had a solid, well-matched team. Even so, Alec couldn't shake the feeling that he'd basically shoved these people into their spots himself. For now, the next day's mission was simple: wipe out the boss of the underground tomb dungeon. With sheer grit and non-stop effort, the clan finally clawed out a win over the dungeon game. And before long, the moment Alec laid eyes on the treasures left behind, anxiety clawed at his chest. This time, the goal wasn't to chase levels, it was to snatch the key items they needed. Soon, the protagonist finally snapped his search into place. He found the very scalp of perdition. Once a necromancer gets their hands on it, the spell turns deadly, doubling every skeleton they summon, while everyone else just gapes at the staff in pure dread, appalled by how hideous it looks. Jilly was the one who shoved his friend to come back fast, not stay put there. As Alec trekked onward, a chilling feeling hit him like someone was stalking his every step. He followed along, then let that rush burn out and fade away. The very next day, Hans showed up with a broken, disheartened look and came to talk to the protagonist. That's why potion sales were at risk of getting banned down the road. His products sold out so hard they practically swallowed the whole market. Still reeling, Alex snapped the documents open again and double-checked every detail. The prices plastered outside his shop were sky-high, because those merchants were totally cashing in on how crazy everyone had started for his potions. And if this kept going, it would spell disaster for the people of Volks. Henrietta said it, and just like that, she burst into his office out of nowhere. She couldn't stop wondering if her father knew the market prices, and Seth was sure he did. The girl burst into laughter. The second Alex's face lit up with shock at her sudden appearance. It pushed him to snap, "Do you have way too much free time?" And that instantly drove her crazy. Still, he leaned in and demanded to know if his potions were about to get banned just because they were too cheap. Deep, Hans agreed, but even after the stock was already sold, they still demanded 2,000 more. It was a mind-blowing amount, and Alec was certain there was no way he could pull it off. Then, bam, an urgent notification from the Alchemy Guild crashes in at that exact moment. After that point, if they wanted to sell anything, it was only those 2,000 units that would be allowed. It looked like those merchants and alchemists were dead set on not selling their potions for the usual price. If he had to crank all those goods out in bulk, he'd burn his time chasing people down and fixing his clan way too slow, and he'd get crushed by the grind. If he could swing it, he'd try to negotiate a smaller order, but Henrietta shot that down and said, "Then just make more." When the mage tried to tell her he couldn't make that much, she smirked and said it was just because he had to hire employees. Hans flat out said, "You can't hire a single soul without getting the Alchemy Dildo's permission first." Then the princess went stone-cold silent. He stayed quiet for a second, then said it like he meant it. If Alec trained those people, everything would be fine. After all, it was obvious this guy could teach beginners and make them look like pros. Yeah, it checks out. Why would the protagonist even bother heading to the guild just to hand out lessons? He could just start from zero and train them himself, just like he did with Anna and Hastel. That snap of memory slammed him back to the book his grandfather left behind. His grandfather who wanted to be useful to the world. So yeah, Alec agreed to give it a shot. Hans and Henrietta burst into happy laughter, relieved that everything finally got sorted out for good. When he saw that, he realized that, yeah, she might be a little scatterbrained. But when it mattered, she always came through. A few days slid by and Alec finally burst out to hunt supplies for the clan. Right in the middle of his trip, he slammed into someone. He barged in and slammed right into him, knocking over a bunch of his new purchases. He blurted out an apology, and the second the other guy collided with him, he instantly recognized who it was. He leaned in and demanded to know if the mage ahead was the leader of White Wisdom. He never saw this coming. So when he found him, he grabbed Alec and helped him back up. He stepped up, introduced himself like a boss as the leader of the Golden Sword clan, then dropped the name Ryuto. In Volks, the Golden Sword stood alone as the only mithril rank clan. Maria stood right beside him. She was the vice leader, and she greeted the protagonist with confidence. Rudo pieced together the whole story from Henrietta, one juicy detail at a time. And it was crystal clear that the girl was obsessed with the successor of the wise. Alex snapped to it. Rutiel had to be a magical swordsman, and Maria was the priestess who wielded resurrection magic. Right in the middle of their chat, the other clan's leader leaned in and teased the festival that's coming up fast. And for the advanced clans, a feast would be laid out ready to ignite a full-on social gathering. Alex was stunned White Wisdom wanted to jump in too, even though they were only in silver class. Still, the leader knew that someday the White Wisdom would start growing right alongside everything else. Ryudo then leaned in, voice serious, and told me there was one more thing he still had to talk about. But instead of talking, he told him he'd send an invite later, then straight up said goodbye. Alex stares in total confusion for a beat, then shrugs it off and heads back home like nothing happened. A few days later, right when you thought everything would finally calm down, Mary hurried over to deliver the invitation they'd just gotten from the Golden Sword. So the whole clan geared up for the social banquet and tore over to the venue. The crew tore off toward the Noble District, ready to dive straight into danger, straight into the House of the Golden Sword. The moment the carriage finally came to a halt, Alex shot to his feet like something inside him wouldn't let him stay down. But Mary snapped in front of him fast, because if they weren't stopped right now, a guard would come to escort them, and that was the etiquette. First, the leader would drop down, then Anna would follow, and the maid would slip out last. Adventurers don't usually care about manners, but once they stepped into the Noble District, they had to obey every rule. The protagonist spotted yet another carriage pulling up like it had just arrived for trouble. It was the exact one Jilly was stuck in. Right at the entrance, a lone figure was waiting, and Alex's gut twisted as he wondered, was that Maria? But the moment he finally showed up, Henrietta beamed totally cheerful after all that waiting. She got invited every single year, and by now she basically knew every detail of the event by heart. With pride blazing in her chest, the princess led them straight into the clan's house. So you show up just a bit later to greet them and welcome them in. He told them they'd get a quick presentation first. Then, after that, they could kick back and enjoy their time however they wanted. The whole clan tore into the party like it was the best night of their lives, as they dug in and let the music run wild. Right in the middle of all this, Henrietta clocked that Alex was totally distracted, and he blurted that he was hunting for something that wasn't alcohol. So she said, "Fine, I'll tell the servants to swap his drink." And if he couldn't figure out what to eat, they'd guide him with the appetizers first, then soup and the main dish last. The protagonist told her, "I knew you were obsessed with me from the start," and kept talking like it was no big deal. But he couldn't help wondering, did she treat any new clan with that same kind of heart? And Henrietta nodded in agreement, because guarding the people of Volks was exactly what the veteran clans were built to do. And the Red Battle Axe and the Green Whirlwind weren't just strong veterans. They stepped up to train and guide the new generation. Those words hit her like a spark, and she practically blurted, "Yeah, I really am kind." Henrietta stammered out, "No, it wasn't quite like that." Ryudo barged in mid-conversation and called out to them so they could talk. The three slipped out of the party together, hunting for a little privacy. Ryudo told everyone he'd just gotten a divine message, like revelation dropping straight onto the Kingdom of Holy Light. Next month, a brutal calamity is about to crash down on Volks. They said this land's divine revelations were nothing but prophecies from God Serlin, and that's why the young man begged Alec to stop going on hunts too far past the city. The very next day, Polk leaned in and told everyone the Tenryu Festival wasn't just some ordinary event. Maybe the offerings ritual just hadn't happened yet, so the magic still hadn't taken hold. Ancient records warned that the celestial dragon's seal wasn't permanent once the power holding it together fades. The barrier snaps in just a few centuries. The festival wasn't just for fun, it was built to hand over the power needed to keep that seal locked in place. That calamity in the divine revelation is tied straight to the demon duke's resurrection. Henrietta froze in disbelief because if that ever happened, the Volks would be wiped out. That demon wasn't some mindless monster. It was a demon god so ruthless that even the celestial dragon couldn't stamp him out for good. With Volk's current military power, there was just no way they could possibly survive. Right here, Alex snapped shut and went quiet like his mind was scrambling for answers. Even after you couldn't beat him, you still paused long enough to realize hope wasn't gone. They could go straight at it and seal the demon duke themselves. The princess couldn't believe it was even possible. Then the protagonist leaned in and said, "If we mash our strengths together, who knows what kind of miracles we can pull off." This was the comeback of despair itself, an event dropped on the 3rd anniversary of the original game, built like a grand finale for top-ranked players, where only their finest gear could stand against the enemy waiting for them. If his information was right, Alec was convinced they could rip the city back from disaster. The golden sword was packed with the celestial dragon's power, the exact force needed to forge the seal. Ryudo stepped up to handle the job, while Henrietta grabbed the other weapons and armor, their holy powers shining with the silver wyvern's mark. The white wisdom would dig up every way to cripple the target, then line it all up for the ritual. To stop panic from exploding, they wouldn't say it out loud. They'd quietly steer everyone farther away. There was still about a month left, but it felt like time was sprinting right past us. Ryudo and Henrietta locked in, determined to give it everything and help. Then the princess slipped away and headed straight for her clan, ready to spill every detail. At that exact moment, the other leader leaned in and said he'd always known betting on Alec was the right move. Even if they called it knowledge, they were sure it was just information lifted from the old sage. If they could drop the Demon Duke, Alec would instantly blow past Gale and become the greatest hero. Rudo just let the words hang there, while the protagonist's nerves churned. Then he backed off, determined to savor every moment while he still could. That's when Alec finally snapped and realized exactly what was going on. As soon as the Celestial Festival wrapped up, there was a real chance Ryudo would march straight to Maria and ask her to marry him. At that very hour, the protagonist pleaded for him to be careful at the festival, and it shocked the boy, but he still nodded and agreed. Henrietta snaps them back to her side, because the party meeting is about to start. Ever since then, everyone's been slammed non-stop. Day after day, they pushed harder and harder, determined to track down the Demon Duke, whether it was grinding levels or gearing up for brand new spells. On another wild day, Alec and Jilly marched to the sealed sanctuary to see what was really going on. The seal was slipping away, so they had to slam up a barrier right now. Casting spells into the sanctuary's 4 directions would snap everything into place, cranking up the activation while draining the demon's power as it awakens. Turns out, that trick was used on enemies at different events back then, and if something like that exists in this world, you'd better believe it can be twisted and adapted. And that's why Alec dove into research as deep as he possibly could. Good news, this sanctuary sat outside the city walls, so the protagonist could lay his spells around Volkson. Jilly blurts out that they should stop hesitating and kick things off from the south. It started when someone blurted out, "Let's lighten the mood before this battle." And somehow that turned into them sitting down for a meal together. That month nearly broke him, but the second he saw everyone there by his side, Alec couldn't help but feel happy. The very next day would kick off the Celestial Dragon Festival, and they threw themselves into checking that sealed sanctuary because they had zero doubt the demon's resurrection was coming. Every last detail was locked in, ready to ignite, and all that was left was to sit on the edge of our seats and wait. Alec knew the fight would be brutal, but he pushed everyone to recharge their energy, because the big day was coming fast. So they clinked glasses together, dug into a hearty, warm feast, and celebrated like they meant it. Alec thanked his friend for stepping up and guiding the whole clan while he was buried in everything, and Jilly lit up with pride for being able to back him. Lorraine couldn't help but feel like the vice leader's teachings were straight up brutal. Rouge nodded in agreement because that hard edge pushed everyone to level up, and it made his confidence soar. Hastil nodded, convinced everyone had leveled up and gotten even stronger. But Anna was the one who pushed the hardest, no excuses. She didn't just level up her black magic to 43. Her white magic surged all the way to 25, too. The moment he heard it, shock hit him like a punch. Alex snapped back that it wasn't a command from the leader at all. He'd only stocked mana potions for true emergencies, not for daily use. And just like that, Anna's nerves hit the roof as she tried to talk her way out of it. Just when things were spiraling, Hans barged in and shut it down, claiming he was behind the extra potions and stepping up to defend her. The girl cornered him and begged for mana potions. Then Alec froze, baffled that the mage had chosen him instead of the leader. Lorraine shot in right after, insisting she was the very first one to come up with that idea. Anna looked jittery, but when they asked what was wrong, the moment she opened her mouth, you could hear her determination roaring. She was set on becoming stronger. Even Hastel admitted, if there were more mana potions, I'd grind levels fast and get stronger for real. The boy's nerves exploded as he got tossed straight into the chaos, and he scrambled to explain himself before everything went up in flames. So the thief chimed in, saying, if we kept it hidden from the boss, then at least you got to talk to Hans about it, right? That's when Anna emptied her savings, then grabbed every potion she could get with the last of her money. Even with the chaos everywhere, the protagonist clocked what was happening, and she couldn't stop herself from wondering why she'd gone this far without asking him first. Anna finally blurted out the truth. She did it because she wanted to power up her white magic. Alec couldn't wrap his head around that stubborn determination, because just moments ago, she'd sworn she wanted to become a sorceress, until that girl finally said she wanted to become a sage. Jilly spilled the news Alec hit level 35 as a sage and unlocked resurrection magic. Anna couldn't shake the belief that the protagonist was always right. Because of him, everyone finally found the strength to grow and their confidence shot up like a firework. But it hit her hard. Why did she even want to get strong? She replayed it all by herself because this wasn't about grabbing power to stop someone else from taking things away. It was about protecting what mattered. That's when the girl finally got it. Becoming a sorceress wouldn't save Alec at all, and the protagonist shot back, no, that's not true. But Anna cut him off fast. He'd never even dared to think about dying. If that happened, nobody would ever be able to pull him back from the brink. Even if they had a way to shield themselves, nothing could save Alec, no one. During the chaos of the battle, Maria was right there, but even Anna's heart screamed that her brother had to be protected, because she refused to lose anyone else. With that kind of stubborn resolve, Alec swallowed his doubts and chose to believe her. Lately, he'd been sprinting day and night trying to lock the clan's future into place. But at this point, Anna wasn't some fragile thing to guard anymore, because the protagonist wasn't mad at all about her secretly grinding her hardest. Not even close. Alec was determined to shield everyone with everything he had. And once it ended, he'd hand the very same mission to his little sister and to Julie, too. It looks like the clan finally became one, because they were helping each other so hard it almost felt unstoppable. But the one thing Alec couldn't shake was wanting to know when they'd do it again. Even with all the gossip flying around, poor Rouge was the only one left out. Ship, while the night stretched on, a hidden sanctuary tucked deep in the heart of the forest. The whole thing started to split because the Dean and Duke's awakening was unfolding right there in real time. An hour before the great battle was set to erupt, the clan got a blazing, urgent report. A knight from the Silver Wyvern showed up and came to warn him right away. On patrol, the crew shouted that the west barrier had finally been smashed to pieces. 4 hours were all they had left before the Demon Duke's awakening, and they had to sprint to get everything set up again. The moment they reached the spot, the spell snapped, and that hit hard, because only top-tier clans were supposed to know where it was. Their whole game plan was viciously simple. Drop the demon from level 100 to 80 by slamming barriers on every corner, because if even one spot was missing, the barrier wouldn't trigger, and that was the key. They could finally stand toe-to-toe with an enemy capped at level 80. Alec knew he could undo the damage no matter what it cost. But then, like a snap of lightning, every bit of magic got unraveled and erased. They'd better race to fix it before the demon finally breaks free. Before anything else, Jilly threw himself in front of his friend and sounded the alarm, calling out whoever was lurking that they'd just been spotted. A bunch of them burst out from the heart of the forest, trading surprised remarks like, "Okay, there are at least a few here worth our attention." The group's leader scoffed, saying the hunter wasn't even close to the cowardly menace their own leader pulled off. Then Alex snapped at everyone that the conjurer they were facing was brutally strong. The mage actually praised him for one thing, at least he could spot something that simple. But what ripped Alex's attention the moment it hit? So it turns out every single member of the group had jet black hair and eyes just like his. This sent the woman into a rage, burning with fury. Then they slammed straight into the fight. The protagonist steered his crew, pushing them to handle the group and keep everyone covered. Because of this, they stopped the joint attack dead in its tracks. And the leader barked at them, shouting, "Fools!" She couldn't stop wondering if they even had a shot at winning with a bunch of low-ranked careers. Alec agreed and fired back that a demon sorceress like her was stuck in the absolute worst spot. Frustration flared in her eyes as she demanded to know how he'd learned about her gear and that barrier when it wasn't even supposed to exist in this country. That's when Alec leaned in and asked if she might have been a reincarnated soul. The room went deadly quiet, but the leader just stood there, utterly baffled. She planned to wipe out half of them and force the leader to talk. The protagonist braced himself and began prepping his magic. The sorceress whipped out dark magic and forged a blood demon. She didn't just rely on it. She used assimilation to take full control, and the axe-wielding warrior. Attacks smashed against Rausch's. The boy flinched at how vicious that move was, and then he went completely silent. Meanwhile, the mage snapped his fingers and hurled a spell into the air. He cast the spell only to get shut down by Lorraine. Hastel and the other guy finally clicked as a team. After he learned the Shaden's skill, Hastel started raining Kaid-based ballistic shots on their opponent. Anna seized the moment and carved out protection for her two colleagues right in the middle of the fight. Meanwhile, she couldn't stop worrying about Alec and Jilly. The demon sorceress unleashed assimilation, a power that trades respect with her inner mind strength, like it's bound to a demon's will. They even split the damage between them because somehow even a demon with regeneration isn't getting off that easy. The demon exploded forward at them like a living nightmare. The protagonist grabbed his friend and demanded, "Hold it." Meanwhile, the sorceress slammed into Alec. Boom, he was suddenly her next target. She knew the boy had magic down cold, but muscle alone couldn't spell out that kind of knowledge. Alec could see her strength too, and that's exactly why she chose assimilation. Seizing the moment, he could finally unleash his secret move. It was the moment life was forged, a homunculus forged into the shape of a knight. Whenever the protagonist threw himself into a solo fight, he charged straight into the front lines, so the whole reason they doubled down on alchemy was clear. To forge Uniform C, the catch is brutal. Each one will drain you for almost 100,000 bucks. The demon sorceress came barreling at the new creature like it was her next target. Alex seized the moment, throwing up barriers and protective spells to shield it. She hit her breaking point, fed up with her opponent's non-stop stubborn, annoying attitude. So she flipped the switch and unleashed the impure soul ability. It was a brutal technique, draining her health while blasting her attack power way up, especially since she shared her demon strength too, which meant facing her was going to be a nightmare. This time, her strike landed hard. She carved the homunculus into a bloody pile of bits. Then it snapped back to life and regenerated. Then he lunged at her from behind and slammed the attack home. Alec burst into laughter at the woman's shocked, wide-eyed reaction. Homunculi were magic-born monsters powered by sheer will, so when he healed, he didn't drink medicine. He chugged mind potions and snapped back. These creatures couldn't be brought back to life no matter how hard anyone tried to heal them afterward. He knew this was a gamble, but he'd already trained and prepped for this exact moment. But this time, he had his opponent one step behind, like he'd already seen the move coming. Since the witch was finally starting to run out of steam from the impure soul's draining power, this was his one-shot chance to end the fight for good and finally repair that broken barrier. Alex fires off the homunculus again. Again, she backs away and slashes through the moment, demonic blood spilling as she prepares to strike. And with one breath, her wounds start closing up, magic mending every last cut. It was the gut punch reveal. She never even came in trying to beat him. She was basically sprinting through that purchase, buying every last second until the demon lord came back to life. The city was about to go up in flames, and honestly, that disaster wasn't her problem. Alec realizes almost nobody would cheer the fall of the Volks. Then the pieces click, and he figures out they're Imperial soldiers. She snaps back, "You're wrong straight up," because they're not officers at all. As the days drag on, her opponent keeps leveling up, getting more unstoppable with every single moment, racing to make sure his allies are still standing. Even at their absolute best, it looks like the strain is crushing them all. Defeating them fast still wasn't enough. These guys wanted more. Allah could crank out even more homunculi, but no matter how many he made, it still wouldn't work. Out of nowhere, a booming voice declared it would all be handled. Then Henrietta burst in with her brother and a pack of knights. Relief crashed over everyone until the witch leader spotted the Duke's daughter. That doesn't touch Henrietta. She reminds her opponent loud and clear that the gap in combat power is everything. Taking on a paladin, that's asking for a whole world of trouble. As soon as the assimilation finally shut off, the witch's skin snapped back to normal, and the protagonist clocked it almost instantly. That's when the mage next to her started pumping a vein of miasma into the air. It's a deadly technique that supercharges demons with horrifying power, while wrecking every other creature it touches. The moment the summoned demon hits the battlefield, it launches a ruthless attack on Henrietta's knights. The evil witch finally spotted her shot at freedom. Taking a step back would make her plan hit harder and work out the way she needs. Finally, she steps up and tells her name Zero. The one who would crush their hope was coming. Remember that. Right after she makes her announcement, Zero vanishes along with her whole crew. Even the Duke's daughter couldn't resist. She demanded to know exactly who those people were. But even the main character couldn't claim that. Somehow, they were still Empire agents, and Zero looked like he'd rather burn the whole thing down. For now, Polk tells them to zero in on the barrier, but remaking it is going to take forever, like one brutal long hour. The whole crew stepped in to help Alec pull it off. Jillian and the others kept watch while he did it. Meanwhile, Rudo was on edge. Every second ticked by, and not a single other clan had shown up at the sanctuary. When the barrier got smashed, they realized White Wisdom might need backup, so they sent Henrietta. In the Volks, only Alec and Maria could bring the dead back. But once it was just Maria alone in the fight, she couldn't hold her own worth a damn. In just 20 minutes, the demon's resurrection is about to hit right on schedule. Ryudo forces himself to stay calm, because there's still enough time left to act. That's when a voice screamed at them to look up straight into the chaos. Hanging over them was a massive rock, ready to crush anything beneath it. A chunk of rock came crashing down from the sky like the world was falling apart. A massive rock slammed into the heart of the clan, cracking the seal and shattering everything. Soon, an evil laugh spills through the forest like a dark curse. Right after the Demon Duke gets reborn, he turns to the humans and thanks them for backing him. Even now, his body still felt weighed down, like something kept pressing him down. Rudo snaps to it. The barrier is finally doing its job, and that means Alex should have fixed it before it got this far. In the blink of an eye, Duke clicks. He realizes 4 seals are set right around him. First, he'd smash that barrier wide open, then race back to keep the city safe afterward. Just as he's about to do it, the swordsman barks, "Stop right now!" Even with the demon breathing threats down his neck, he just brushes it off. Because right now, he's got way bigger problems to handle. Rudo didn't need to speedrun his own death. And honestly, it'd be mercy to let him slip away. Right there in front of the knights, who wouldn't budge. Then he'd swagger around, taunt those fools, and raise the great demons with a single summon. Maria boldly declared they were about to unleash the sacred enchantment. Rudo's magical attack explodes even stronger. Even his opponent had to admit his sword strikes were downright legendary. No matter how many demons lunged at him, the Duke never ran out. He kept summoning fresh demons to his side. But Rudo pushed hard to dodge injuries, because with so few healers on deck, one mistake could be catastrophic. So he slams down the order. Each clan has to bring up 3 monsters. Everyone rallies together, and just like that, our fight against the demons erupts. They only had to grit their teeth and hold out for a bit until Alec and the rest came back. The moment Duke sensed Maria's celestial dragon power surging, he closed the distance at once. The clan leader whips around on the spot, his face etched with sudden worry. That's why, right before the battle, the protagonist ordered him to keep the Lord's seal in the priestess's hands. Alec forged a sealing stone powered by the celestial dragon, the kind of treasure she'd finally want close by. Rudo steps right in front of Maria and throws himself between her and danger to protect her. But that still wasn't enough. The demon was quicker, snatching the sealing stone before anyone could stop it. And just like that, it stole the priestess's life. Duke finally gets why a girl like her is stuck right in the middle of this raging battlefield. With power like that, it was downright laughable that they thought they could trap him again. Then the demon shatters the stone and hurls Maria's lifeless body aside like it's nothing. He geared up to crush them all and drag them into the darkest despair imaginable. When the protagonist's crew finally rolled in, the chaos ripping across the battlefield, the field was pure terror. Those scenes were so brutal, they couldn't even wrap their minds around it. Lorraine spotted Maria crumpled on the ground in an instant. Anna screamed at her brother to do something, anything now. Alec told the group, "Don't worry, I'm taking charge of bringing Maria back." Jillian, the Silver Wyvern, moved in to keep that spell from getting cut off mid-cast. Anna and the others rallied to jump into the fight and take down the demon. Duke barked out a laugh because he knew Vyudo and his knights had finally hit the wall. Somewhere deep inside, he knew he'd made a fatal mistake because everything he'd pushed this far for was about to end with his death. Then the demon sneered at him, taunting that if he ran now, maybe some would live while a voice cut through the chaos, Ryuto. Alec charged toward Maria's lifeless body. He swore he'd bring her back to life, so everybody hang on to the fight just a little longer. Those words lit a fire under the leader, and he barked an order, pull back his men and lock in tighter, stronger defenses. Even though they were plotting, the Duke burst into laughter at their attempts, knowing every single one was doomed to fail. Then he hurled a demon straight toward the protagonist. At that exact moment, Henrietta and her knights charged into the front lines to fight. The girl unleashed the power of judgment and smashed it into that creature. Steam-flecked nature vanished fast, evaporating into the air like it was never there. There she stood tall, feeling proud as her holy knight power burned bright. Meanwhile, Alex stared down the priestess's brutal wound and took it in right there, face to face. When he thought of Mia, determination burned in his chest. He was going to bring someone back to life, no matter what. Life slammed into him, and he fought to steady his own breathing before it got out of control. He started casting the spell, gripping it like it was destiny. Then the body snapped back to life and started working again. Without wasting a second, He shoved a mana potion into her hand so she could snap back to full strength. So the priestess herself unleashed miracle light magic to heal her own wounds. Her power could birth a real miracle on command. Once she activated it, anything could be healed, no matter what. It was a top-tier healing spell, exactly what you'd expect from an Oracle rank clan. The second Maria spotted her condition, horror hit, she'd been killed, and she didn't even feel it coming. Meanwhile, the Golden Sword was in big, unstoppable trouble. Even though the girl desperately wanted to go back and help, she couldn't just turn around. Alec leaned in and told her to do it later. Then he handed her a cloak and helped her out. Right then, Maria spotted the tears in her clothes, and she slipped aside to change before anyone could see. Finally, the protagonist sprinted in to rescue Henrietta mid-battle. Everyone teamed up and stormed in together to bring Duke down. With everyone in front of him, Alex slammed magic into his companions, pumping them full of energy from behind. It was a full-on strategy where everyone unleashed their absolute strongest abilities. Then, when the enemy drained their spirits, the protagonist stepped in and shared his own. Then he reached for the healing potions and gulped them down himself, one after another. This way, they could unleash full power non-stop, and that was exactly the trick he'd learned while training with Giles. So there was zero room for trouble. Henrietta saying that might have been seriously inappropriate, but she was absolutely loving every second. In the end, everyone finally broke free and fought without a single thing holding them back. With that cue, the Duke snapped his fingers and unleashed a deadly poison gas spell into the air. Paul screamed for everyone to back off now. In the game, it was a spell that kicked in the second his HP dropped under 75% as he realized those adventurers weren't backing down in the slightest. The demon finally dropped his act and unleashed his real power. His transformation had finally taken hold. Alec ordered the Holy Knights to trigger the Blessing of Light right now. Everything would have been fine if they never stepped outside that circle, because that's the only way to dodge the fatal attack. She planted herself dead center and drove her sword forward, shoving the demon back with sheer force. It was a fearless counterstrike, and they pulled it off flawlessly. The poisonous mist didn't waste a second once it spread. It wrapped around Polk, and he just brushed it off, insisting he was going to be fine. He and the other mages slammed up barriers and magic veils to shield themselves, but they were right on the edge of finally pulling it off. Just one more push and they'd finally crush him. Even Duke couldn't wrap his head around how mere humans were still standing after all this. Rage surged through him as he lunged straight at the protagonist, because deep down, he knew this was the biggest threat he'd ever faced. There, Alec froze in shock because he couldn't even recall the demon having anything like an attack in its playbook. Jilly blurted out in pure panic, like she couldn't stand the thought of what might happen. But Henrietta threw herself in front of him to protect him right there, blocking the danger. Even after all that, she leaned in and demanded to know if he was hurt. The protagonist just froze, jaw dropped, as the girl burst into laughter at how he reacted. Henrietta bowled him over with sheer brute strength. She reminded him no matter what happened in battle, she wouldn't let him come back with a single scratch. Nervous as his heartbeat pounded, Alex shot off his healing magic in a flash. He was still reeling because that girl basically threw her own life on the line. And yeah, clumsy as she was, she still ended up being the Silver Wyvern's leader. And Alec, he swore that scene would haunt him for a long, long time. Snapping out of his thoughts, he clenched his resolve and pushed to finish the fight with the demon. Henrietta braced behind her shield and fought off the Duke's next brutal onslaught. Field then Seth seized the opening and blasted him with magic. And the protagonist fired up the situation again, injecting energy to keep them standing strong. Before long, his opponent started locking up more and more with every heartbeat. This was the exact opening they'd been waiting to strike. At last, they slammed the right spell into place and chained that demon up for good. But just like everyone feared, Duke's strength finally gave out, and he couldn't keep up the act of reflection anymore. Or at least that's what he told himself, because the creature snapped free on the spot, seething with pure rage. Then he summoned even more mighty demons to back him up. The moment a brand new army came storming in, the already battered adventurers felt every last bit of hope drain out of them. That's when the protagonist seized the opening and summoned even more homunculi into the world. They backed the hunt for the demons, even as their own defenses got shredded, because he couldn't afford to worry about any of that right now. Right before the knights could strike, a deadly web snapped shut around them and trapped them tight. The Duke let out a laugh because he'd used the exact same spell to lock them all in place. They'll pay for this later, with their lives right now. Just sit back and watch. The Demon Lord's whole target was Alec, and he just kept slipping past each vicious follow-up attack. Even with the Duke battered and weak, they still couldn't find a single crack to launch a counterattack. Before he could catch his breath, the protagonist's own legs got yanked into the trap too. He raised his bow and went for fire arrows, which the Lord could dodge with zero effort. The Duke gripped him tight, already poised to end his life. Just when he thought he was done for, Henrietta swooped in to save him again. Jilly loosed an arrow and ripped his friend free from the demon's clutches. This move absolutely stunned the Lord, and Alec burst out laughing because this guy apparently still didn't even know the first basic tactics. Next up, the Holy Knight would swing in to finish this battle with the biggest finale imaginable. Henrietta slid magical enhancement into Alex, and suddenly his powers surged and unleashed the power of judgment on Duke. Slowly, he crumbled into shimmering light, and just like that, he was finally defeated. Right then, the demon snapped to it. The fire arrow the protagonist had launched wasn't aimed at him at all. It was meant to break the spell and free his own trapped companions. Realizing he'd gotten beaten by humans, he burst into loud, unstoppable laughter. After all that, his real power still didn't even come close to this. Duke locked eyes with Alec and dropped a sharp remark about him. His eyes, his hair, and his very soul burned with intensity. Now, he finally got it. This city's faction had a plan, and they weren't hiding it well. He snapped his fingers. Every last summoned demon got dragged out and sent packing. And just like that, the adventurer's jaws dropped. Lord sealed himself again, obedient as ever. Maria's chest tightened because that sealing stone was already smashed to pieces. The Duke suddenly remembered there was yet another one right there with them. Alec yanked it back once more and immediately realized it was right there in his pocket. It was an absolute sight to behold, especially for the priestess, who remembered this stone had been smashed to pieces. The protagonist leaned in and said, "This is a low-purity prototype. It's going to be seriously weak." It would have worked. Sure, if Duke hadn't just calmly agreed to be sealed anyway. Alec just sat there, stunned, wondering how he even got that conclusion. Then the Lord told him it was his way of saying, "Thanks for entertaining me." The seal's power would burn for a full 50 years, and he'd be itching to square up with him again the moment the time came. The protagonist snapped back that he'd be making magical offerings and his awakening would never strike again. Finally, Maria closed the distance and came right up to him. And together with Alec, they hauled the ceiling into place. Meanwhile, the Duke leaned in and talked one-on-one with a young hero who was surprisingly older. Ahead, a whole storm of tests is waiting for him, so he's got to push through, crush them, and prove the results he earned. His final breath wasn't a speech at all. He whispered a prayer to the gods, begging them to shield him. And just like that, the sealing of the Demon Lord finally broke right to its end. And the great battle tore through everything like a storm. Henrietta lunged into Alex's arms and squeezed him tight, celebrating like nothing else mattered. Everyone else joined in too, cheering hard like they'd just survived the worst, and knowing it all ended perfectly. At that exact moment, he still pressed rouge for what he'd said earlier about the god of light, Sir Lon. It felt downright wild for a demon to kneel and beg for protection from beings far stronger than him. There's no way a creature of darkness would pull off something like this. So maybe this wasn't an act at all. Maybe it was a blatant provocation. Polk sat there stunned, because after Duke declared himself the demon god, the whole thing felt bizarre from the very first second to the last. One thing was deadly clear. The god of death had been slain, setting up a brutal contrast to Sir Line, the god of light. Only the Empire's people dropped to their knees and prayed for the dead who'd been slain. That reflection hit him hard, and suddenly he couldn't stop asking one question. Who the heck was Alec, really? In the city streets, people couldn't stop talking about how Duke the Demon had come back from the dead. And suddenly whispers spread that the boss of White Wisdom was the very one who had taken him down. The news ripped through the crowd like wildfire. Julius Pendragon, the Lord of Vokes, showed up, just to thank the protagonist. 5 days crawled by since the great battle. And after all that time, the protagonist finally got to meet Julius. Watson stood right beside him, boss of the Major's Guild, ready for anything. The Lord leaned in and said, "My children are beyond grateful for everything Alec has done for this city." He couldn't stop thinking, I should have met him way sooner. But the truth was, life slammed him with a bunch of other problems first. But now he had to chase the clan leader's level of greatness. No excuses, no shortcuts. Julius, grateful as hell, decided to push them up to the golden rank and slap an extra 100,000 in cash on top. Ever since then, Alec became way more hero than relative to Gale. And it was crystal clear they were keeping him as the face, the symbol of the Volks. The protagonist snatches up the rewards because there's nothing in the world he really wants. So why not take them? After the thanks, Julius still couldn't let it go. He stepped forward to apologize for his hometown and the damage it brought. That raid on the village was on him. Every bit of it was his fault. The village sat like a trapped secret, ringed by a monster-haunted forest, but it sat right near the Empire, and it could act like a blazing shortcut straight to the royal capital. Then Gale quit adventuring, slipped into village life, and kept a sharp eye on the Empire. The village chief, Billy, and the hunter, William, stood in the exact same spot. Alec froze when he heard all those details. Turns out, this wasn't just a straight-up fight plan. There were political knives underneath it all. Right now, the village's reign has fallen into the hands of the eldest son and Abel Pendragon, the next Lord Henrietta and Paul's brother. The protagonist looks back and realizes none of those brothers ever got named until they became lords. But Abel never reported Giles's passing 7 years ago. This blunder was a real problem, so they yanked the official who was supposed to report to the Lord and handed the job to someone new. There's a real shot this third party went in and messed with the information. That's when Alex starts wondering if Abel kept it hidden to safeguard the country. Julius shoots back that he can't say for sure if it was pure necessity or just straight-up incompetence. When his father pressed him, the young man stared back and thought, why are we even talking about that death? These words cracked the whip on Julius suddenly. He was able to get reprimanded and obeyed, as the village carried the fate of the whole country in its hands. Honestly, even the Lord didn't expect him to have that kind of skill or even care enough about the country. Unlike Henrietta, she had the skills and the patriotism to back it up. Julius finally owned up to it. He'd skipped checking with Abel first. Turns out that massive rock that smashed the demon sanctuary wasn't random at all. It was magic everyone already knew about. The majors of the Empire would whip out a deadly technique called meteor fall whenever they needed things to go nuclear. That means we've got to slip in infiltrated spies. Alex's brain flashes, and the only thing it gives him is a total blank zero. The hero stepped in and fired off a question asking if they had any clue about the demon summoners. The Lord shoots back that they should become the special forces of Cerberus, those legends everyone fears. It's only a nickname, but people whisper that the Imperial Army snatches orphan kids with black hair and forges them into soldiers. These kids were forged through magic training, taught to master sorcery, and pushed to survive right alongside the soldiers they became. Survival to adulthood was grim, less than 10 made it. That's when Alec finally gets it. Zero's hatred toward him has a real reason. Most people didn't realize it, but your hair color could actually hint at what kind of magic you carried inside. The nobles all seemed to sport golden hair, glowing with light magic, while brown hair marked the earth types. Blue hair screamed water. Red hair flared up in desert lands for the fire attribute. And green hair belonged to wind users, especially among the elves. As Alec looks back, he recalls the crew he's seen people he knows each with hair in wild different colors. Meanwhile, Kaz Empire nobles with jet black hair were tied to the shadow attribute. People treated it like power and pedigree wrapped into one. While the kingdom stuck to its ways, the empire flaunted this color as a badge of true nobility. This was a cruel, starving land where the cold bit deep and monsters prowled everywhere. With no way to cut them down, survival in that place was basically impossible. Ever since that day, people with black hair rose to nobility, and they forged the empire we know today. That hits Alec like a punch to the chest, making him stare into his own origins because his grandfather never once said a word about them. Julius shoots back that if it was truly a problem, Guile would have decided this wasn't the right moment to open his mouth. But before long, he was hauling bricks and building a fortress right beside that shattered village. If the village gets hit, it's because the Empire already tracked them down, and they refuse to let things stay peaceful. At last, the chatter finally fades, and Alec turns to thank the two for stopping by that day. The Lord felt the same deep gratitude, secretly praying the protagonist stays close with Henrietta and keeps getting along with her. Later, as he strolled down the street, on the streets, Alex sprinted straight into Jilly. He wrapped up his shopping, and somehow they ended up side by side, hashing out their next move. They were plotting a trip to the Forgotten Island because everyone knew a dungeon was waiting there. Then Alex set his sights on grabbing the exact pieces he needed to rise as a full-blown necromancer. Right then, after Watson rattled on about hair colors, it finally clicked. This was exactly the kind of detail that fit his whole profession perfectly. Suddenly, they realized the streets around the clan are blasting with noise. Right at the house entrance, two dudes tried to barge in and swaggered that they were friends of the protagonist. Hastel clocks them as suspicious the moment he hears their leader's name, because the weirdos always show up, no matter what. Even Anna admitted she had no idea who they were. They used one Alec approach just to get a clear look at what was really going on. The two men leaned in and pushed hard to get him to remember exactly who they were. But he has zero clue what SAR's coming. They cackled through the pain, because the moment they tore out of that village as kids, the world promptly forgot they ever existed. Then it hits Alec. He finally remembers Dory and Gran, the brothers who rushed to the capital to become adventurers. At last, they broke through and got inside the mansion to talk. Dory was a spell-slinging swordsman who drew power like a paladin, ready to grant it to anyone who needed it. Everyone else is on edge, but they still force a warm hello as they meet you. Dory cracks jokes with Jilly now that he's grown up, but the shyness still clings to him like it always has. The protagonist can't stop wondering why they keep getting visits, and they tell him the city won't stop buzzing about the clan leader, So they march in to see for themselves, plus they've heard the village fell, and they're desperate to get the real story. The moment the brothers heard Anna was Mia's little sister, curiosity hit them like a wave. They couldn't wait to meet her. They admitted her life must have been brutal ever since. They even swore they'd show up for her the moment she ever needed help. The two stormed out of the village for good, swearing they'd never come back yet somehow. Losing it all still felt brutally wrong. Still, they're just grinning. Alec and the other two are alive, and that's all that matters. As usual, both of them were buzzing with excitement. But the moment they decided to team up with the protagonist, it totally caught him off guard. Dorian Gran wanted in on the clan, so that's exactly why everything went down this way. Rouge couldn't stop wondering if the swords people were calling the twin swords back in the capital were really them. He got wind of it, two golden rank fighters, and neither of them was born into a clan. Whether they fought on the front lines or moved right behind the swordsmen and mages, their teamwork was razor sharp and their battles ran like clockwork. Alec couldn't believe how hard those two had been grinding ever since. The brothers traded sly remarks at each other, cracking up like they just pulled off the biggest flex and loving every second of it. In the end, the same fire in their spirits burned, just like when they were still kids. If Alec's being straight with you, having two advanced class guys backing him up was a total lifesaver. And above all else, they were the kind of perfect swordsmen who made you believe legends were real. Even though they'd grown up, Rouge by herself still wasn't enough to keep things safe during the Duke incident. The only reason they even pulled off victory was because other clans stepped in. And honestly, their wild energy lifted the whole clan's spirits and kept the mood flying high. Alec asked whether they had zero interest in any other clans, and the two bragged that people had come asking only to get shut down by them. On top of that, they knew the protagonist inside out, and they trusted him completely. Even Jilly had to admit it. Alec wasn't guessing, he knew exactly what he was doing. It shocked the protagonist because it was the first time his friends had looked this cheerful since they fled the village. Back then, it felt like almost nobody had the slightest idea what that village was really like. Alec nodded in agreement. But first, he'd still have to put the brothers' skills to the test. Then the two of them would roll with the party straight to the dungeon on Forgotten Island, the twisting maze of the GD. And yeah, both of them agreed on the spot. Rouge can't stop herself. She's dying to find out what the rest of the team would do if they all showed up there. The protagonist pauses and thinks hard about the next move, because if everyone's going, they've got to choose together. Right then, Jilly cuts in and says only 4 people get to go. Having that many people on his back would trap Alec in a total mess of problems. And in the capital, rumors about the Swordsman brothers were flying, both hovering around level 40. With a gap that huge between them, this scrappy team was one mistake away from total disaster. The protagonist had no choice but to agree because they needed to throw Dorian Grant into real action and see what he could do. Anna's freaking out about how long they'll be gone, and she grabs their attention to promise they'll be careful. Then the whole crew huddles up, grabs a boat, and blasts off for their trip to the island. And the Forgotten Island sat way out there, far from Volks. Turns out the Darkness God's followers had already been slaughtered there, and once the underground temple fell, it turned into the labyrinth, where the dead trap you, so people feared that dungeon with their whole souls. Awek had one mission: wipe out the boss and snatch his Book of the Dead, because that was the only way he could finally become a necromancer. Deep in the dungeon, a twisting labyrinth waited, and if they slid down in a spiral, they'd finally hit the very bottom floor. 3 lynchmen closed in. Della threw her hands up, and then, boom, the boss turned out to be an old lich. The brothers already knew this. Boss shrugged off status effects and was packing abilities that could spell disaster. Alec had fought monster abilities before, so he figured he could handle this just fine. If they keep their bearings and don't lose the path, they'll slip through with little more than minor headaches. The crew fires up and hits the road together, and he dashes right into the dungeon before the tension even has time to settle. The moment they spotted the skeletons, Dorian Grand smashed them with brutal heavy blows. Their reactions were insane, like they'd been training their butts off for years. Right on cue, Rue said it, and sure enough, those two were absolutely deadly at what they did. First up, the spell swordsmen held their ground, staying back and waiting to strike. And as the paladin stayed back to blast support magic, everyone else pushed ahead. When Dory goes into attack, Grand steps in to claim his spot, and they trade places back and forth, taking turns in a relentless rhythm. Those brothers teamed up so perfectly that each one erased the other's weak spots, and they always knew exactly when to switch up their moves. Every one of his skills hit exactly when it mattered most. Still, the brothers broke into laughter, because they wanted to at least bring the girls along and turn the whole thing way more exciting. This makes Gillies let out a heavy sigh, because their personalities clash hard with the powers they wield. It felt like Lorraine absolutely hated that dungeon, while the brothers were losing it, imagining her terrified in there. Alec dropped a rumor if you crack the Book of the Dead, you can learn a whole new profession just by reading it. At this pace, that ancient lich won't even stand a chance, whether they move together or strike completely on their own. So the crew marched down together and wiped out the dungeon with terrifying ease. Finally, they pushed through everything and made it to the last floor. Alex stared around, baffled like the place had swallowed the last staircase, and he couldn't believe how fast they were suddenly there. The four of them flung the doors wide open, and then he burst into the boss room, where the Book of the Dead was waiting. The moment they came into view, the moment it launched, the lich burst into laughter, mocking the clueless humans who dared to invade his room. That monster stood poised to demand their sacrifices, offering them up to his god. But just like that, the whole battle was over in the blink of an eye. The brothers didn't even break a sweat. Alec just stood there, stunned, watching the whole thing unfold like he couldn't believe his own eyes. If they'd been stuck with Hastal and the others, the non-stop fight would have wiped everyone out. Yet, Dorian Grand didn't even breathe hard. And of course, the protagonist said yes, letting them join the clan with zero hesitation. Even with all that power, the two still matched each other perfectly balanced, down to the last detail. They tore through mid-rank foes and bosses, but once the real high-level monsters showed up, the battles started dragging like they'd never end. In the end, taking on monsters far stronger than you means you'd better team up, bring real offense, lock in defense, and move as one. At last, Alec finally charged off to grab the exact item they'd been chasing this whole time. Now, he finally gets his shot to become a necromancer. When he looked back on it, his class back then when he played Chronicles of Discard was necromancer. And that alone was the reason he couldn't wait to run it back again. The longer he stayed in this world, the more his hunger for power swelled, maybe because his black hair was somehow tied to it. But before he could even crack open the Book of the Dead, everyone whipped around in confusion when a thunderous crash roared from the door. A horrifying monster burst in and started clapping, cheering them on like they'd just won the greatest fight ever. They showed up way younger than anyone expected, and honestly, that didn't even matter. Alec's mind absolutely shattered at what he was staring at. This undead wasn't just some run-of-the-mill monster, it was the game's absolute final boss, the one everyone feared. This dude was the Lord of Death, and yet he got stuck in some half-baked dungeon. The god clocked that he'd been recognized, and just like that, everything got way simpler. Now, he demanded the adventurers grab their weapons and prove they were strong enough to back it up. Grant fired off. So what's the plan this time? While the protagonist braced like something terrible was about to snap. Death itself didn't stand a chance. This lord was insanely strong, and the moment a necromancer hit max level, they had to unleash the special ability called Enstra just to break him. Every single person in that group had to be stacked locked into advanced classes and fully kitted to the max. No matter how you slice it, there's no way they're pulling this off solo. Alex snapped back to the return scroll if he got the opening. He'd yank it and teleport out in a blink. Right then, the god snapped a warning. No one was getting out of here, because this whole place was under his control. It was crystal clear if that fight ever started, they'd get straight up swept out of the dungeon. Death's been quiet for ages, so the moment visitors finally showed up, it felt like the world was about to get chaos fun real fast. He kicked things off by unleashing the Cursed Field, which slammed the door on all healing magic. Alec realized it was the Abyss Child's power because a Death Lord had no right to be tossing around dark magic. Then the monster unleashed the Triple Spell, an insanely rare trick sorcerer's guard-like treasure. That thing could even sling demonic arts and summonings like it owned the dark, and honestly, it felt like straight-up madness. Alec felt it in his bones. This undead wasn't just hard to beat, it was flat-out impossible. Right before the fight even started, the protagonist stepped up and begged for permission to ask one question. This sudden interruption cracked the god up and gave him the opening to finally talk. Alec drilled into what this was all about, why show powers he usually can't even touch. It felt like he was baiting them, gauging every reaction, like monsters somehow shouldn't know anything like this. He just had to figure it out. Was he the same human who somehow got reincarnated as an undead in this world? Right then, the god thunderously clapped. Honestly, for someone that young, that ending was downright mind-blowing. Still, he couldn't stop asking himself what kind of reply he was supposed to give next. Alec couldn't help but wonder should he tell him he was reincarnated too, just to spark the reaction. Instead, he leaned in and demanded to know if the undead even knew the wise Geely, telling him, "I'm your grandfather, and it's on me to teach you everything I know about this world." Right away, the god of death clocked the protagonist's lie. He straight up refused to believe it, like the whole thing was mocking him. Because even the god himself never once handed Gao a single shred of sorcery knowledge. So yeah, there was no way that guy could have known all those details. The wise one didn't just study facts, he learned the hard way, through experience, not theory. There was no way anyone could recreate someone like Alec, and when the protagonist blurts out, he wonders if the undead even know about his grandfather. That's when he finally dropped the bombshell. Gale wasn't just someone he trained, he was his disciple. 50 years had passed since he vanished from her side, and the silence still hurt. Then Alec snaps back to it. Giles and Watson were adopted by the same man who owned him as his master. The undead keeps yapping about how he lived when he was still human, how he mastered the secret art of reincarnation, and stacked different techniques using what he remembered from his past life. Because of that, he tossed aside his human body and was reborn as an undead. But this wasn't even close to the answer Alec had been praying for. But the god of death just couldn't let it go. He had to know how the protagonist got that knowledge. Even Joey couldn't figure out what they were even talking about. Sensing the wizard's tension in the air, watch this god unleashes his magic. Magic surged from his hands and his companions dropped like dominoes. They weren't dead at all, just knocked out cold. Now, it was only the two of them left, so the masks finally fell and the truth could come out. Alec's gut dropped. He knew he was in deep trouble because he'd already talked way past the point of no return. Unlike the Duke, nobody was coming to rescue them, and there would be no resurrection, not even a miracle. Then Alec finally blurts the truth. He didn't start here at all. He reincarnated into this world from somewhere else. Like a zombie with a soul, he carried memories from his past life. Before all this chaos, this world was just a game called Chronicles of Discard. It was a city and abilities game, and that's why he held secrets nobody else even knew existed. The god of death leans in and asks the protagonist if, by any chance, he's ever read the real Bible. Elit's stunned reaction leaves the undead reeling. They can't wrap their heads around how he knows that. Like he pulled the info straight from somewhere. At last, he slams his hands on the book and calls it forth. Snapped the book open, dove straight into the pages, and started reading. But then something in the distance yanked the protagonist's focus instantly. It hit me, this whole thing was written in Japanese. The undead clock Alec II, he can read the sacred writing like a key to a locked door. And after years of research, Alec still can't make sense of a single word on those pages. So yeah, the god of death is absolutely thrilled. Because this twist of fate hit like a perfect strike. Alec was totally baffled. How could a book like that even be here? Every profession got laid out in crisp, detailed detail. This was a full-on strategy guidebook made specifically to help you dominate inside the game. The undead brags that this wasn't the real Bible at all. It was just a copy of the true one. Those pages were filled with stuff nobody had ever seen in any other book. And then the protagonist drops the truth. It's the language from his old world. If you read between the lines, it was probably another reincarnated soul who planted it. There. Left it behind like a secret, and everyone treated it like a sacred scripture. Then the god of death steps in and hammers the church's scriptures with his judgment. It praised the god Serlin and swore that every job, skill, and magic the people could use came straight from that entity. None of it added up, because monsters don't just fight, they bring powers too. The church spun this convenient lie just to bury the truth. If it came down to it, they'd swear the Bible in their hands was the real one. Alec can't shake the feeling that the undead was basically a teacher. Makes total sense when you realize he'd been his grandfather's master. Once he died and Lily vanished, it felt like forever since anyone had taught him a thing. These two versions of the story exist for two completely different reasons. The Church of Scripture blasts Serlon's greatness all over the place to prove the faith is real and real in new followers, while the other Bible keeps the old knowledge locked up safe. There wasn't a single ideology to cling to, and not a word about divine beings, just plain straight accounts. Right as he clutches it, the book vanishes from his hands like it was never there, getting trapped in the skeletons. The first Bible was a total unknown, like it dropped out of nowhere, and nobody had a clue how it ever reached humanity. Everyone knew it. Every kingdom and its royal family guarded a copy of that book like it was priceless treasure. Most of their content matched word for word, but 10 of it flipped the whole vibe. In the Pendragon Kingdom, you've got sword fighters and guardians. Then the Kaz Empire flips it with dark mages. The Wyvern Kingdom goes beast tamer crazy. Atlantis rules the ocean, and the Sacred Kingdom leans on priests and sages, like every land guarded its own class secrets, different on purpose, as if someone was trying to split them apart. No one knew why those differences existed, at least. Not until the gods finally revealed the truth. Nope, there's no universal playbook, because the strategies change from country to country every time. Alex says that if there's a real motive behind it, then the whole way books and jobs are distributed would completely flip how battles get fought. The undead realizes they've been talking about possible wars, and the protagonist cuts in fast, insisting it was only a possibility. Still, that viewpoint was wild and different, and once you see it, everything starts making sense. If they could really read with that kind of premise, everything would click into place, and the missing pieces would finally snap into full view. The moment the skeleton called down multiple copies of the other Bibles, Alec begged them to wait sure. He'd cooperate with the research, but he still had lives to keep standing. The skeleton nods, then hands the wizard a ring like its fate sealed in metal. It was a teleportation item one press, and they could vanish back to the dungeon entrance. Meanwhile, the gods demanded they show up once a month, and if they didn't, they'd face the consequences. The second the rest of the crew snapped away, they were terrified they might have blacked out and lost consciousness. Then Alec blurts out that somehow they're still working with the monster, like they've been cooperating all along. Then he leaned in and told the adventurers the truth. He was an ancient human. And yet Dory and Gran can't wrap their heads around it, though. Honestly, it fits perfectly, since Giles is clearly their master. Finally, Alec leans in and asks the undead's name, because he's desperate to say it right. Then he snaps his fingers and introduces himself as Gall Black, a name that history itself forgot. As Alec tries to introduce himself to the group right beside his friends, Gall shuts him down and refuses to listen. From that point on, just one of them would plug into his research. But the real priority was clear. He had to start building his future as a full-blown necromancer. The master didn't care about humans switching jobs. What he wanted was anyone who came from another world. The protagonist sucked in a shaky breath, then finally grabbed the Book of the Dead. The moment he cracks it open, he freezes because the writing isn't in Japanese at all. Every single page of necromancy lore and its forbidden formulas got etched down for him to see, and if he could actually cast with it, then raising the dead and forcing life back into them would be real. Now he can't help but wonder, did he finally perfect the technique? Then boom, a voice pops up and congratulates him for unlocking the power to talk to the dead, and it freaks him out on the spot. That voice lived in Alex's head alone. No one else could hear a single word of it. From that moment on, the new ability locked in as a passive power. Back when he was younger, that voice always lit the way, explaining everything and snapping answers into place when he asked. By tapping into the dead's messages, Alec could finally see the spirits for what they really were and feel their presence as if it were right in front of him. And the higher his level rose, the farther his communication reach stretched, and it got bigger every time he used it. So he had to keep hammering his necromancer power constantly. The idea of talking to the dead could get way bigger, but only if a bunch of strict conditions were met first. But once it evolved, those effects hit harder than ever. The voice wraps up the whole explanation, then shoots a prayer begging that his luck holds strong as battle closes in. Those words slam into Alec and leave him stunned before he even has a second to fully grasp what he just heard. Gall showed up to see if the protagonist actually pulled it off and finished with the book, and his companions throw a wild celebration for his brand new achievement. As Alec whips around, and he shuts it down right then and there. When he locks eyes with the undead, Jilly's totally baffled. She shakes him hard, panicking over what he's seeing. Then the protagonist whips his hand behind Gall, pointing straight at Mia's spirit. He strides in, leaning in like his life depends on it, just to catch the sound of her voice. Maybe she's got insults and rage ready to burst out, but still, nothing ever happens. Alec blurts out to the others that he can actually see her, but the spirit says absolutely nothing. Not knowing what Mia was trying to tell him, he crumpled to his knees and broke down in tears. Gall suddenly realizes he's been able to see souls this whole time. And the wild part is, he never even knew that kind of power existed. Then he leans in and challenges the protagonist. So you really think you can summon this soul? If he mastered necromancy, he'd be able to rip a soul right out of the grave. So yeah, he just had to find out what she was telling him. That's exactly what necromancers were built for, the power to raise the dead and bend them to their will. Alec freezes for a beat, then finally nods and agrees to take the plunge. He fired his power at Mia the second he got it. Then, bam, a skeleton that looks just like the girl bursts onto the scene, and everyone freezes in terror. Gall snaps to attention, thinking, usually they summon 5 at a time, but there's only one soul here. Guess this is a special case. Alec quickly tests whether the undead can actually talk, but he gets nothing back. No answer, no reply, just silence. At the last second, he slams the brakes on the magic and cancels it. Maybe that was the moment it all went wrong. At its heart, necromancy was the dark craft of yanking souls into chains that forced them to obey. So the god of death figured he could use that power just to talk back. That's when Alec finally remembers the crazy power he's got, his one-of-a-kind ability. Maybe it's because Mia was calling him now. This power explodes the moment he becomes a necromancer. And yeah, this was another power Gall had never even heard of. Who knows, if the protagonist's power keeps growing, he might just use it to finally talk to Mia. So I figured, what the heck, why not try? And the protagonist would rely on the Master Wizard's help to pull off the experiment. Jillian and the crew couldn't just stand by, they were ready to jump in and help him on this journey. Me, it makes Alec grin, because having them there means the world to him. Then Gaul finally brings the whole conversation to a close, and slams the entire crew right back to the dungeon's starting point. Now they'd have to storm the Labyrinth of the Dead again. This time with even deadlier enemies waiting, stronger than the ones they beat before. If they push all the way down to the bottom, their levels will skyrocket just from the grind. After that, the protagonist finally gets fired up and pushes himself to talk to Mia. This time, skeleton generals were set up across the labyrinth like traps, planted with deadly precision. Alec unleashes his own summoning to call in a squad of knights. Jilly just realized he was finally using the staff they dug up from underground. It's an item that doubles your summon straight up if you're using skeletons. Death blessings supercharge the summoned with unreal power, so even one knight couldn't stand up to a general. So that's why Alex launched a bunch of them with those boosts cranked up. The brothers stare in disbelief, saying those troops are brutally strong even while being outnumbered. And it feels like they're watching a real war explode right in front of them. More monsters are barreling toward them, so this time the adventurers lock arms and team up to fight back. It didn't take long before the necromancer level of our protagonist shot up, and he tries to summon his skeleton again, one more time. Since no voice had shown up, Alec clenched his teeth and pushed himself harder and harder, determined to grow stronger anyway. More time crushes by, and the whole group runs the same mission again and again, and he's frantically trying to call back the spirit of that girl who's gone. Even humans couldn't deny it. She was right there in her human form. Even though they couldn't pin down her face. She just freezes, no movement, no reaction, like the whole world paused for her, even after they push past the dungeon's halfway point. As they press on, Jilly grabs the protagonist's attention and begs for a break before they burn out. Because Alec was rushing, Grant shot the hunter a nod. Yep, they'd have more than enough time to slam through the maze. Outside, it was probably pushing midnight, so they finally laid down to sleep and made sure they ate something before the night swallowed them. Alec was still stuck on the 5th level, and he knew he couldn't hide in there forever. Maybe he'd pushed himself too far lately. Every fight went off without a hitch, and the clan's victories surged so hard that he almost forgot the rage burning inside him. And he can't stop wondering what Mia's spirit is trying to tell him. Meanwhile, Anna couldn't shake the worry because a whole week had already passed since her brother stormed out. Rouge heard they'd be back in 2 days. But so much more time slipped by. So much that it was the very first time the girl had been torn away from Alec for this long. Lorraine lunges in to soothe them, promising everything's going to be okay. Sure, something might have happened. But their leader is tough as nails, so nothing dangerous is going to go down. Even after all her attempts to force the truth out, Anna caught the thief straight up lying. Every single person in that room was on edge, nerves snapping like wires. Suddenly, a messenger burst in, shouting that the adventurers were back and they were safe. At that exact moment, the girl launched herself off the dining table and sprinted straight to the entrance door. The second she laid eyes on how wrecked the group was, she slammed on the brakes and stopped dead. Everyone looked wrecked and beaten down, but Alec looked like his hope had hit the floor. The protagonist stormed right past Anna, so locked in that he didn't even clock she was there, and greeted her not long after. She even asked what happened, because he looked absolutely terrified, and the protagonist shrugged it off, saying it was no big deal. Then told them they'd have to bolt again the moment their supplies were finally ready. But before he could slip away, Anna grabbed him and demanded he let her tag along with them this time. Alex spun around and snapped at her not to be so selfish. They couldn't afford to be that relaxed right now, and she needed to get it. Right then, the girl yanked free from him, terrified and stunned beyond words. But she knew something awful had happened to her brother, and it ripped him into a completely different person. Anna still had Alex's words burned into her mind together. They had to get stronger. And he always rushed in to help her, even after she bombed every training run, or when the clan was in deep trouble and the stakes were sky high. Her brother always flashed a grin and jumped in to repair whatever was broken. That's why her heart just sank when she saw the look on his face. At that exact moment, Anna understood her help was going to be totally useless. Hastel was totally baffled about what just happened and even more shocked that nobody was stepping up to protest their leader's outrageous behavior. Lorraine burst through the tension first, then she slapped Alec right across the face. Tears blurred her eyes as she demanded to know what her boss was up to. After all this time, Anna clung to hope and waited for him, too terrified to eat, too sleepless to breathe. She snapped at him for ditching the very reason he busted his ass in the first place right up until today. So he'd do everything in his power to shield that little girl and his brand new family. The thief had no clue what was going on, but her leader knew one thing for sure: ditching her family just didn't fit. Watching her fight back again and again, Anna's eyes finally spilled over. She started crying, and she couldn't stop. Finally, Alex slammed his staff down. Then he swallowed his pride, sprinted to his sister, and apologized because he was this close to messing up again. He totally freaked her out, then apologized because even though he'd already decided to lean on her, he still didn't want her hurt. And to make it even uglier, he hurt her just because he wanted it, pure selfishness, no excuse. In the end, Anna sprinted over and wrapped him in a tight hug, finally welcoming him back home the right way this time. The moment he sees the other side, relief hits like a tidal wave. The tense atmosphere snapped into relief. Alex shot Lorraine a grateful look because she'd yanked him out of sleep. He finally stepped up and demanded they listen, because he was about to tell them everything that happened in the Dungeon of the Dead. And on top of that, he was dying to spill his secret to them. He dropped the bombshell that he wasn't from this world at all, then revealed he got reborn as a transmigrator. It was a world of far more advanced minds, so unreachable that even the boldest could never get there. In this place, there was a game built from this world, and that's why I knew every extra detail everyone else missed. Alec didn't even clue in Jilly. He just wanted the moment to hit them both like a curveball. Yet the hunter didn't look nearly as shocked as he should have. Sometimes the protagonist would blurt out a line that hooked his attention, and you could tell he wasn't acting like his usual self anymore. Even the others barely blinked, because their leader was already extraordinary. And that kind of background just fit him. Even for Dorian Graham, it changes nothing. Alex still came from that village, born and raised right alongside them. With the dust finally settled, our protagonist snaps back to the real story, the main topic. After they clawed their way through the labyrinth of the dead, he finally became a necromancer, and with that new title, he unlocked the power to talk to the dead. But Alec always felt that looming presence, and once he unlocked this power, he finally tracked it down to its source. It'd be way simpler to just show everyone. And just like that, he raises his hands and summons a ghost. A lone human figure suddenly stepped into view in front of them. Lorraine points it out, and it's clear she's talking about a pretty, adorable girl. Anna spots Mia and instantly locks up, stunned into silence. She dashes ahead, desperate to catch up, and finally talk to her. She dropped a sincere apology and confessed she'd been dying to see her for what felt like forever. The protagonist tells himself Mia looked like she was dying to say something, maybe a regret, but he still can't talk to her spirit. Feeling powerless, they sprinted through the dungeon day after day, but he still never managed to claw his way to the goal. As Alex spirals in regret, Anna snaps back that none of this had to happen. After everything, she finally understood every twisted feeling her sister was carrying. Mia's old friend crossed her mind, and you could practically see the worry hit her like a punch. Because Alec always grinds himself to the bone, and even in the afterlife, he'd still leave her heartsick and worried. So what Mia was probably trying to say was, hey, take better care of yourself. Because she clearly cared more than you'd think. The protagonist froze in disbelief, staring like, wait, was that really all? It makes perfect sense. She never once blamed him for being weak. If anything, she was always throwing herself in front of him, fighting to protect him. And that moment hits him hard, so he swears he'll never push himself to the edge again. So yeah, he promised to keep me from spiraling, and now she can finally rest in peace. Mia's spirit surges in and wraps Alec in a tight hug right as tears spill down his face. He'd been stuck in that same cage the whole time. I'm running from his real self, in fighting tooth and nail to live by everyone else's ideals. But now he finally broke free and took his own path. Not for somebody else, and not because of regret. Alec was choosing this for himself, to live by his own will, and he owed that mindset to everyone, especially Mia, who taught him how. That night, the protagonist finally sat down with Anna and Jilly, and it felt like forever since the three of them had sat and talked together. The hunter starts with a shaky apology, admitting he should have stepped in sooner for the girl. Right as his friend tried to read the feelings behind it all, Jilly was just as desperate to understand them too. If the dead could somehow talk, and if they could treat her like she's still alive, who knows? He clung to that foolish hope, like it was the only lifeline he had. But Jilly knew deep down he was supposed to be the only one who stopped Alec, yet he tried to fight those words like they were wrong. Because his friend claimed he was reincarnated, he felt this sudden push to open up even more too. So he leans in and tells the two straight up that he's been carrying feelings for Mia the whole time. No wonder they were shocked he'd been hiding it for ages. Anna says she already knew, because it was as plain as day, leaving Alec completely stunned by how little she seemed to care. Even the protagonist admits it. He always knew, and honestly, it feels like Mia might have known too. Anna finally confirms what she feared, but her older sister slams the brakes and begs her to keep quiet, because she won't let anything slip that could hurt the hunter. In the end, That spacey, scatterbrained vibe from the girl wasn't just random, it was her sneaky way of reading exactly how they'd react. Jilly lets out a frustrated sigh. Because it hits him, he's been stressing out for all this time over nothing. The protagonist breaks into laughter because in that exact way, the two are basically the same. Finally, Anna blurts out that Alec has finally beaten Mia, so now everything changes. Now he might finally get a fresh shot at finding a new girlfriend. He clocks that she's probably terrified with someone replacing her dead sister, and Alex shoots back that he's not looking for anything right now. No matter what happened, his family always came before everything else. Anna corners him and demands that promise, then prays he won't get played by some creepy woman. She was laser-focused because Mia trusted her with Alex's safety. From that moment on, she stood guard over him so he'd never dare break his word again. A few days slam by, and then the protagonist barrels right back into the labyrinth of the dead. The moment he snatched the ring from its place, he got yanked through teleportation and dumped straight into the back of the dungeon. Gaul cuts right to it, asking them on the spot if they're ready to pick up the hunt from the other day. But right away, he realizes that girl's soul has already slipped into the other world. What a kick in the teeth he'd have to shove the whole study of talking to the dead to later. But still, Alec thanked him anyway for the thought, and he was ready to help him with the book research. But the undead cut in and told him, "You can go home now." Spotting him sparked a whole new idea in his head for his studies. So the undead tore the protagonist out of the dungeon and threw him back into the world. Alex lets out a heavy sigh at Gaul's total lack of consideration, but he's secretly relieved he doesn't have to stay trapped there. Now he might finally have something to do handling the clan's requests. Back in the city, Melissa fired off a stack of missions and gave everyone something dangerous to do. But none of them even managed to snag Alex's attention. She slips out a warning. There have been reports of dragons roaming around the royal capital lately. That leaves the hero staring at the sky, wondering could this be the rumored red dragon invasion he heard was charging straight from the Wyvern Kingdom? But that request was insanely hard, so Alec turned it down, leaving the assistant crushed. Then she leans in and suggests they take a shot at the islands of Atlantis. It was an archipelago where the Water God Festival was only 10 days away, and everyone knew this was the perfect excuse to sneak in a little vacation. It was a chance to snag water attribute gear, and the enemies there were so weak they barely stood a chance. Alec's face lights up. The idea totally wins him over. Like, Melissa gets totally hyped and starts scrambling to get her own stuff ready, too. She got shut down on the spot, right away, no entry, no exceptions. Left her worries stuffed in a drawer in her office. In his past life, Alex was stuck in bed all the time, so he never once got to see the world or go anywhere. He could finally drop the plans for Mary's new trip. But first, he had to dig up intel on the best hunting grounds nearby. The moment he lets that sink in, his excitement spikes, like he can't wait to see what's coming next. The White Wisdom was a brand new clan, and just 6 months after it was born, they shot up to gold rank like it was inevitable. Now, every member has clocked out and hit the beach on vacation. Hastel never expected a big island trip to feel this good, and even Rouge nearly choked on the shock when the leader pitched that idea, especially with them staying at a fancy noble resort. He even figured they'd end up in a cave again. But Alec insisted it would be more fun to mix things up every now and then. Even Henrietta couldn't help but beam this perfect weather was made for a trip. On this expedition, the Duke's daughter rode alongside them, and Seth came too. After her father declared it was a special mission for the White Wisdom, he slammed the door shut. She wasn't allowed to join. But after that girl blew everything up in a scene, Julius finally snapped and went straight to the White Wisdom's house himself, begging for permission. In the end, he wasn't really a lord at all, more like a father figure, but hey, Julius still footed the bill and covered the travel costs. Polk stayed behind to handle everything for his sister while she went off to travel. And just like that, Alex suddenly remembered Henrietta had an older brother too. He managed it, then turned to the girl and asked what kind of man that was. Henrietta tells him her brother became the next lord always buried in study, while the other two brothers stayed out there guarding the people. It was crystal clear she adored Abel, fully convinced he was the kind of guy with a good heart. Judging by how she reacted, she probably had no clue about that destroyed village or the case behind it. In that instant, the princess caught sight of. Then she spotted something ripping through the water surfing, and it instantly grabbed her attention. Meanwhile, Anna stepped in to steal Alex's attention from right under his nose, and it jerked him from side to side like something was dragging him off course. And finally, the whole crew pushed through to the hotel and grabbed their rooms for the night. They were counting down for this moment. Then they walked into a place so fancy it basically stole their breath. The protagonist told everyone, "Tomorrow's all ours, so we're checking out those ruins." Henrietta and Anna snapped their hands up right away, ready to take the go. On day 3, they finally got some entertainment with a little light hunting, but for everyone else, it didn't exactly feel light at all. By the fourth day, the whole arena went wild for the festival of the water god, the grand hunting day everyone waited for, where hunters went after goblin-sized jellyfish that were basically effortless to strike down. On the fifth day, in the afternoon, they'd finally sail back home. So Hastel was stunned by one thing. Why hunt jellyfish at all if they weren't even dangerous? Alex slams the point home last time. They couldn't take part in the dragon event because that whole Demon Duke disaster blew it up. On top of that, if they could take down those jellyfish at the Water Goddess Festival, they'd win magical stones. You can gather them up and turn them into all kinds of powerful, useful gear. They were so good at snuffing out fire attacks that flames couldn't even get traction. With everyone's level that high, you should be able to snag those one-of-a-kind class weapons. While the crew was still talking, Seth soon barged in and called everyone for dinner. Everyone dug into the meal and couldn't stop loving every bite. Left him completely stunned because it tasted absolutely incredible. Then, just like that, the crowd blared the announcement. It was time to dance. Alec announces it. And he can't help wondering, was that performance really samba? One of the dancers grabbed Rouge and hauled her right onto the stage. Lorraine just kept laughing right in his face. Even the noble looked like he had a secret hobby, because this guy danced so insanely well it felt unreal. In the end, they were laughing, soaking it all in, and locking in happy memories that would last forever. The second day kicked off with everyone piling onto the beach, and Lorraine was absolutely glowing, like pure joy had a pulse. Meanwhile, Heistel and Rouge lounged under the beach umbrella, totally comfortable, and they had zero intention of moving an inch. But soon the girl clocked it. This place was packed with jaw-dropping, beautiful people. Every single person there was loaded, and they exuded charm like it was their superpower. Still, she didn't feel like she was anything special at all. Back in the day, Lorraine never even dreamed of stepping into the sea to play. She was always out chasing food, and her ribs showed she was so skinny it looked unreal. Every time she spotted them out on the streets, it hit her like a gut punch. Those common girls made her feel small, like she didn't measure up. Now that I think about it, she's been showing way more feminine vibes lately than she used to. Meanwhile, Gilly got bombarded with advice from his brothers on exactly how to walk up to girls. The two already knew the truth. Your friend never confessed to his crush until the very end. And he was still stuck on Mia like it never ended. So yeah, the whole deal was this. He had to grit his teeth and start moving on, even if it hurt. The two grabbed Gilly and shoved him toward the girls hanging out by the bar. First, he studies every one of them clocking their jobs like a pro and reading their role in seconds. The shortest one was the maid. The second one, a class that's kicked into reverse, backing away like it's retreating from fate. And the third, yeah, she's probably a full-on swordswoman. But before anyone else, he stepped up to the first guy he could find, leaving Dory and Gran absolutely baffled. Yeah, this guy had straight up snatched one of the girls' wallets, after he chased the thief down and drove him off. Then the shortest girl rushed in to thank Gilly. She even insisted on thanking him with a full-on me, but he turned and walked off like nothing had happened. The brothers fumed because the idiot Gilly just vanished, stealing the coolest walk in the whole world. World that he should have stayed put and just accepted it. Because yeah, he was naturally the popular one. Meanwhile, Alex's group charged through the ruins, ripping through the past like they owned it. The guide warned them that ahead waited the temple of the water god. Long ago, Sirlan forged the gods that ruled water, earth, fire, wind, and vacuum, and he named them the 5 dragons. Anna already knew this story was hiding in the scriptures too. 5 dragons were chained to the land itself, and that bond poured blessings onto the people below. Alec mulls it over. Those 5 dragons in Volk include the Sky Dragon, and he bets the missing one is the Vacuum Dragon. They're ushered into the temple and brought straight to the spot where they pour out their magical energy. The moment they laid a hand on the statue's gem, their magic would be unleashed. Henrietta and Anna stride in, staring in awe as that stone starts to glow. The protagonist does it again, burning with curiosity to see just how much the change swings when the energy shifts. And right at that moment, the gem erupts in a blinding, unstoppable glow. They're forced to shut their eyes. The guide stumbles in, totally bewildered, and he can't believe the sheer ocean of magical power hitting him. They say that if you pour enough magical energy into the stone, it flashes blue, and then it blesses the person who dared to offer it. The guide even throws Alec a grateful nod for his offering, then leads them out of the place. On the third day, they sprinted toward a deserted island with no people in sight. The only monster haunting that place was a swarm of coconut crabs, and they'd tear through everything, dropping nothing but trashy little loot behind. Henrietta blurts out, "Why do we have to hunt them?" And the main character's savage, hilarious take on that crab soup they ate last night. That dish cost nearly $1,000 in cold cash, and it came out as pure, refined gourmet perfection. They wanted to hit the same meal again once they got home, so they headed out to catch some crabs. Hunting would have been dull for Alec, So he split everyone into teams and turned it into a competition. Now Jilly finally gets why his friends swore the hunt was fun. The winners would snatch the soup dishes first, and the losers would be stuck watching the snack vanish. Alec kept it straightforward. He stacked every beginner from the class into one single group. Henrietta's heart sank, being left out stung way more than she expected. Seth reminded her that she couldn't join after all, and she swore to her father she'd stay out of any battle business. They couldn't afford for the girl to get hurt, so she let out a heavy sigh. Then Alec leaned in and promised to show her a taste of his power, if she stayed right there. For now, it was only this once, and it finally seemed to hit the spot. Then the teams got dispatched to haul in the crabs, and the whole showdown was on the clock for 2 non-stop hours. Right in the middle of the teams hunting crabs, the protagonist threw up his skeleton summon, like it was a desperate weapon. He unleashed his power to jump into the competition, too. On July, he finally brought it all back home. Even his own companions couldn't believe it. Alec was sprinting into action before anyone else could blink. Henrietta's jaw dropped when the protagonist unveiled his brand new power. Meanwhile, the rest raged that their leader was basically cheating using his own army to do the hunting for him. For some reason, he was actually in the race, while Jilly just didn't look nearly as fired up as his friend. Lorraine snaps because fair competitions are the least they deserve, but Alec goes and makes everything worse. Rouge burst into laughter, saying it's a shock because their leader almost never dives this deep into the games, but maybe it's finally because the mess with his old lover is settled, so he's let himself breathe and relax. Before the thief even had time to blink, he spotted a jellyfish sprawled across the rocks. What really grabbed her was the creature wedged and trapped tight between the stones. She can't help feeling bad for the monster. But Rouge is still praying they won't get attacked after all they did for it. Together they muscle the stone up, hoisting it high with raw strength, hurling themselves at the jellyfish to help them out. As soon as it's free, it rockets back to the ocean, and even the waves seem to cheer for them, like it's thanking them. Lorraine even catches it as kind of adorable, and she clocks that the noble next to her is unusually silent. That's because he's got this nagging fear she might go hunting those jellyfish, especially since she was so obsessed with them in the first place. While Lorraine was stepping into an internal war of thoughts, Alex's team snatched the competition title in the most unfair, outrageous way imaginable. On the 4th day, the huge festival for the water god finally crashed into town, and Henrietta's jaw dropped, because it kicked off way too early in the morning. Those other adventurers were still locked in a brutal race from the day before, all because the magic stones were dangling huge rewards. The princess lights up with cheers as the group waits for the jellyfish to finally show up. Then, out of nowhere, they start popping up one after another, and blasted the beach with water, swallowing everything they could see. Alec was the first to lunge at the monsters, blasting them with magic. The water god's messenger never swings back because he's so relentless that weak attacks can't even touch him. They had to wipe out every single one of them with one perfect strike. After he finally wrapped up one of them, the protagonist snatched up a deadly fragment. You had to snatch 10 of them, only then could you forge a single magic stone. If you got hundreds of them, you could grab a full load of gear, but the grind is so brutal that stacking them up would take an eternity. If they called up skeletons again, like yesterday, that beach would turn into total chaos. By the time it was all said and done, they had to slug it out no other way. So the adventurers grind through monster after monster, taking the fight into their own hands. Anna points at everyone still trapped in the water and asks if they should focus on them next. Alec nods and tells them those bigger jellyfish don't just shed fragments. They spit out real magic stones straight from the source. The main character yells at the group that the huge jellyfish is pushing back, so everyone has to stay sharp and careful. Dorian Graham didn't hesitate. He grabbed the challenge, tore off down the path, and raced to be the first to crush it. Hassel sprinted in to help them. Like clockwork, the creature snapped back to life and shut down every one of their moves. But the moment he unleashed a Hadouken, that attack got obliterated. The protagonist thinks he absolutely crushed the counterattack because his own skill just canceled it out perfectly. It was insanely efficient. Meanwhile, the others kept right on working, scouring for fragments and scraps, pairing up in tight groups. Lorraine, though, and somehow couldn't land a single real hit on them, like something was seriously messing with his attacks. Later on, they raked in a huge pile of magic stones. Still, Alec's jaw dropped. He could summon the water god's magic again and again, even while he fought off the jellyfish. Out of the water, a dark silhouette burst into view, and someone yelled at it on the spot. They spotted a jellyfish so gigantic they had to crane their necks just to see it. Jilly leaned in and asked, "So you're saying this is prayer too?" Maybe it was the boss of this whole area someone had to be in charge. The brothers snap into overdrive, rush straight at it, and go all in ready to smash it, win the fight, and grab the prize. But in the very next breath, they get blasted flying into the air. Even Gilly's arrows can't land a single hit. Nothing works. Anna's spells get shut down right in their tracks. Rouge stepped in front of her, throwing up his shield to protect her. Lorraine fires back, asking how they're supposed to take that thing down, and Alec goes quiet, his mind racing through the only way. Massive, high-defense foes shrug off regular hits. So you can't land a weak point strike unless the right element lines up, meaning the weaponry has to be enchanted first. While Rouge holds the line and Anna slams in the attacks, Alec powers up everyone's weapons. Right when he started mapping out the strategy, he spotted Hastel circling the massive creature like he had a plan. The second he made a move to strike it, the protagonist barked a warning at the top of his lungs, screaming for everyone to scatter and get clear. Right there, Heisto blasted the jellyfish with a Hadouken and drove it through with pure crushing power. But the creature's fluids splashed onto everyone nearby, soaking their heads in one brutal hit. It turned into a total catastrophe, leaving the whole beach grimy and wrecked. Hastel was grinning from ear to ear after they snagged a bunch of stones, while Rouge kept ranting at the idiot who'd unleashed this whole mess. Alec was genuinely shaken because this time, brute force was the only thing that let the martial artist slam the monster down, proving he'd gotten terrifyingly strong. Maybe it was time to level up a few of them and push them to a higher class. Henry burst in, rushing over to congratulate the group for their victory. She tells them, "We're swapping stones for gear over at that tent nearby, come on." The protagonist shoved forward to see what options were even on the table. Then it hits him. Those aren't the only things he has. He's got equipment and a whole stash of extra accessories, too. At last, Day 5 crashed in, and it was their final day in the archipelago. After the battle wrecked them, everyone crumpled into sleep and finally rested through the night. Right before they bolted, they traded their winnings for magical stones. They told us the monster's bodily fluids would dry up by themselves, so there was nothing to panic about. The brothers hauled in the most stones alongside Hastel and traded them for swords and shields, while Hastel snagged a breastplate and a single pair of joints. Jilly and Anna barely had enough. Traded what little she owned of bow and arrows for a cloak, a staff, and even a brooch. Lorraine and Rouge snatched a dagger and a shield, and when it was all said and done, everyone walked away with nothing but wins. And finally, Alec traded away his own stones, then snagged exactly what he'd been chasing. So they snatched their boat and tore back home. For him, this wasn't just any trip. It was his first time stepping into a body that felt real, sharp, and alive. Ever since he was a kid and got sick all the time, he dreamed of one thing, finally running with his friends like he could breathe without limits. Chronicles of Discard let him live wild adventures through a screen, and in the chaos, Alec made friendships he'll never forget. Yeah, he lost some stuff along the way, but he walked away with something just as priceless: memories. It was a blast too peaceful. Like the calm was so eerie it made his skin crawl. As he spirals in his thoughts, Henrietta suddenly pops up and asks if something's happened. She couldn't shake the worry Alec was sobbing alone out on the deck. He had no clue his feelings were hitting that hard. And he rushes to clear everything up, calming the princess's fear inch by inch. Alec tells her it was only because he was having the time of his life and hated the idea of it ending. And she bursts into laughter because it sounds exactly like something a kid would say, which totally humiliates him, but yeah, it's kind of true. The protagonist suddenly recalls it and rushes to give Henrietta a stunning necklace. He traded his stones for gear and even snagged that item too, because she got left behind while everyone else was out there having fun. The girl thanks him and vows to baby that gift like it's priceless, and Alec just cracks up because he knows she's totally going over the top. Still, it was Henrietta's very first trip, and the moment she got a gift from a friend, because of her status, she was shut out of family trips, and nobody around her ever treated her like she mattered as an equal. Now that she turned 18, every noble duty came crashing down on her shoulders, and she had no choice but to start fulfilling them. The protagonist can't help but stare into the moment and think, so that's what this really means. And he can't stop thinking about how deeply Julius adored his own daughter. Then he straight up tells them to come back to this island someday. If she wanted it, they could jump back into the adventure. This world was packed with fun they couldn't miss. Because they were gold ranked, they pulled the "we'll escort her" card pressing that idea until they convinced her father to let her go on the trip. And that's what makes Henrietta burst into laughter. Even though every word came straight from his heart still, it wasn't enough to bring comfort. Anna leaned in and listened to every word of their conversation, and the tension hit like a wave right in the middle of everything. After that, the whole crew tore back to the city and waved the princess off as they said their final goodbyes, and tore into their bags, pulling everything out piece by piece. The moment they stepped into the house, Mary appeared, and with her came a brand new butler like nothing they'd ever seen before. This was Gilbert, the brand new servant, who suddenly showed up out of nowhere while they were gone.